Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the soft pre-dawn mist of an ancient Kerala lagoon. One that, long ago, would have buzzed with merchants, sailors, and the intoxicating aroma of black pepper. You might think you're cozied up in your blanket right now, and you are. But in a moment you're going to be right there on the wooden jetty, toes dangling over the still water, watching the first light catch on glinting peppercorns piled high in woven baskets. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from, and what's the time where you are? Drop your city name and clock reading down in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake to the rasp of birdsong mingled with the gentle lapping of lagoon water at low tide. The sky is still a deep indigo, just brushing its fingers of violet across the horizon. You step out of your stilted hut, its walls patched with coconut palm fronds, and inhale. There's a peppery perfume in the air, faint at first, but growing richer as dawn approaches. It's the scent of black peppercorns, ground from vines climbing wild in the western Ghats, bound for markets as far-flung as Rome and Alexandria. In these early hours, the spice-scented breeze feels like a promise of adventure. The lagoon itself is a quiet cradle, shielded from the Arabian Sea by a narrow spit of sand. Local fishermen paddle silently in slender canoes, nets tucked neatly against their sides, heading out to harvest prawns hidden beneath mangrove roots. You recognize that these waters are more than just a fishing ground. They're the heart of Muziris, that vanished spice port whose very name evokes wealth and wonder. According to classical sources, Muziris thrived from at least the 1st century BCE through the 5th century CE, riding on waves of pepper-laden trade under the seasonal monsoons. In these centuries, India's Malabar Coast was the world's spice pantry, and Muziris was its doorway. Historians are still debating this question, whether the port called Muziris was one sprawling harbor or a network of smaller jetties spread across lagoons and rivers. But regardless of the exact layout, you sense the grandeur it once held. Turning inland along a narrow mangrove-bordered path, you pause at a small clearing carpeted with fallen palm fronds. In the shadows, you glimpse rust-colored soil, softened by centuries of rain. Nearby, wild pepper vines twist around the trunks of jackfruit trees, their glossy leaves glinting with dew. You reach down and pluck a few peppercorns still clinging to the vine, each one plump and unexpectedly heavy in your palm. You pop one in your mouth. It crackles beneath your teeth, releasing a rush of spicy heat that warms your nose and throat. This pepper, discovered here in the lush western Ghats, would become so valuable in antiquity that it was sometimes used as currency, even to pay off fines. That's not something most history books mention in passing, but it's a quirky fact. You could literally trade peppercorns for a day's wages. As the sun peaks above the horizon, you climb a small rise and gaze across the lagoon entrance. There, beyond the slender sandbar, the Arabian Sea stretches wide. Soft pink clouds drift overhead, picturesque and serene. Yet beneath that calm surface lies the pulse of international commerce. Papyrus sails and rhinoceros-hide boats would soon round that spit, steered by Phoenician, Greek, and later Roman mariners, eager to load their hulls with pepper, cinnamon, and cardamom. Cardamom, you learn, grows best at altitudes of 800 to 1,500 meters under the forest canopy. Yet here, in lower elevations, traders often brought green pods downriver on bamboo rafts, then dried them in the sun along the jetty before packing them into leather bags. These fragrant pods were considered a royal gift. Cardamom was so prized that in ancient Egypt it was used as a perfume and offered to pharaohs in ceremonial rites. Below you, the village awakens. Smoke curls from clay hearths where women stir conical pots of rice and lentil stew. Dogs yawn and stretch on the muddy banks. You weave through narrow lanes between thatched houses, greeting sleepy neighbors who nod and smile as they carry baskets heaped with fish or coconuts. The local temple bells ring out a low, rhythmic chant, and you pause in reverence. Here, along the sacred shorelines of Muziris, temple priests perform early morning puja rituals, blessing each departing canoe with turmeric paste and incense smoke. It's believed that these offerings secure safe passage across unpredictable seas. You watch as a priest dips his fingers into a brass bowl, flicking bright yellow turmeric onto a hull's prow. Then he lights a handful of fresh white sandalwood incense, an expensive wood imported from the southern reaches of the peninsula, and waves the fragrant smoke toward the sky. The ritual feels timeless, connecting everyday commerce with divine favor. Scholars still wonder whether these rites were local innovations or adapted from Aryan Vedic ceremonies, another point historians are still debating. Soon you reach the edge of the lagoon, where long wooden jetties fan out like spokes from a central hub. Carpenters labor on newly built docks, lashing planks together with core rope. Merchants stand nearby, examining sacks of pepper and nodding to one another. You slip through the bustle to see the goods. Pyramids of black pepper shining like polished stones. Piles of pale cinnamon quills harvested upriver. Braided strands of ginger root coiled like springs, and sacks of gingerbread yellow turmeric root. The colors and shapes hypnotize you. Each spice holds its own story. Cinnamon, flaked from the inner bark of tropical trees. Turmeric, the golden root, used to dye textiles and embalm the dead. Ginger, prized for its warming properties in cold Mediterranean winters. Obscure fact time. Ancient Greeks and Romans sometimes mixed black pepper with gypsum plaster to whitewash their villas, thinking it repelled insects. Who knew your home's walls could double as spice-infused bug spray? You tread softly among the merchants' stalls. A tall Greek trader in a white linen tunic hefts a clay amphora of olive oil and inspects your village's offerings with polite curiosity. He smells of dried figs and brine from the Mediterranean. Nearby, Arab merchants bicker over a crate of rhizomes, some claiming they're inferior, others insisting they're top grade. Voices rise and fall like ocean waves. A passing rumor whispers that this year's pepper crop was smaller due to a prolonged dry season. You lean in to catch the gossip. If supplies are tight, prices could skyrocket back in Alexandria. More reason to keep your senses sharp. Tonight, after a day in the sun, the spice merchants might share tales of prices so high, a lion's share of a trader's profit could be wiped out in a single miscalculation. It's market drama that could make even the calmest fisherman's heart skip a beat. As midday approaches, the sun stretches high overhead. You find a shady alcove beneath a cluster of coconut palms and settle onto a woven mat to sip cool palm wine. The fermented nectar tastes sweet, with a hint of effervescence on your tongue. You watch a line of porters shoulder heavy loads of cinnamon, balancing them on padded yokes. Their skin glistens with sweat, little rivulets running down their necks. Despite the heat, their faces are serene. This is their life, their livelihood. Without them, the ancient spice routes would have been impossible. Obscure small note. Cardamom used to be so rare that merchants would sometimes adulterate the pods with hollow clay shells, stuffing a few genuine seeds inside to fool buyers. Scandalous, but a reminder that where there's profit, there's always a scheme or two. You think back to the lagoon entrance where you first arrived. Imagine the sight of an entire flotilla of merchant ships congregating there. Sleek red-sailed vessels from the Roman Empire, stout Arabian dhows with lateen rigging, and local catamarans carved from single tree trunks. Each craft would wait for the winds to change, for the southwest monsoon, blowing reliably from May to September, to fill their sails and carry them across the Arabian Sea in as little as 30 days. That seasonal wind cycle was the engine of the spice trade. Without it, the journey could take twice as long, and goods would spoil. By harnessing these monsoons, Indian Ocean mariners pioneered routes that connected ports from the Red Sea to Southeast Asia. It's one of the most remarkable examples of early global trade networks in human history. But in this tranquil moment, there's no rush. You close your eyes and listen to the distant clink of pottery, the soft creak of timber, and the subdued hum of dozens of voices negotiating price and quality. You breathe in that rich concoction of salted air, pepper spice, and palm wine. For a fleeting second, time seems to stand still, as though you're suspended between past and present. You realize that, one day, this bustling harbor will vanish beneath shifting sands and rising tides. Yet right now, everything is vivid and alive. By afternoon, the lagoon water turns to molten silver under the sun's glare. The day's trade slows. You rise with the sun brushing gold across the canopy. The peppercorns you collected yesterday resting cool in your palm. You tuck them into an earthen jar slung at your hip and step onto the narrow trail that zigzags up into the western Ghats. At first the path is muddy, an ankle-twisting tangle of roots and fallen fronds, but soon it narrows to a mossy corridor beneath soaring kapok trees whose trunks stretch skyward like cathedral pillars. Light filters down in emerald shafts, illuminating tufts of ferns and the occasional flash of scarlet from a wild orchid. Everywhere you look, life teems. Insects hum, monkeys chatter, and the air is saturated with humidity and promise. As you climb, the scent changes. Black pepper's sharp bite fades into a sweet, resinous aroma cardamom. You know that these green pods, plucked from high-altitude vines climbing teak and jackfruit trees, will be dried and shipped across the known world. In ancient times, just 1 pound of cardamom could command a price so lofty it equaled the monthly wages of a Roman soldier. That's mainstream history. By the early centuries CE, cardamom was already coveted in imperial Rome, prized not only for its flavor but also as an exotic perfume and digestive aid. You pause beside a grove where farmers have laid woven mats under vines heavy with plump pods. A wizened woman kneels, her sari rolled up to her knees, flicking each pod between her fingers to test for ripeness. You crouch beside her, watching the ritual. Pluck a pod, snap it open, inspect the tiny black seeds. In local tradition, each morning before heading to market, farmers whisper a brief prayer of thanks to Corvai, the goddess of fertility and harvest. Then they toss a pinch of turmeric into the soil around the plants, a quirky folk belief that the yellow root drives away pests. You crouch down and scoop a handful of bright turmeric powder, pressing it into the earth around a vine. Turmeric, you've learned, was called the yellow sapphire by South Indian kings, used to dye royal robes and mark auspicious ceremonies. Yet archaeologists are still debating this question, whether those earliest turmeric-dyed textiles were locally produced or imported from beyond the Ghats. You rise and continue upward, the ground sloping steeply beneath you. Giant boulders, slick with moss, lie scattered like ancient sentinels. Straining for breath, you pause to admire the view. Valleys of brilliant green rolling out toward the sea, mist rolling up from hidden waterfalls. Somewhere down there, hidden by the treetops, runs the Periyar River, one of the lifelines that carried spice-laden rafts toward the waiting jetties of Muziris. You imagine rice barges and cardamom-laden boats gliding downstream, their crews balancing on narrow decks, ginger and cinnamon piled high behind them. By late morning you reach a clearing where cinnamon trees stand in orderly rows. Their thin trunks have been slit lengthwise, and bark peels in long, curled quills. A young man sits on a low stool, scraping away the outer bark to reveal the fragrant inner layer. With deft strokes, he peels off thin strips and rolls them into tight scrolls. You stroke one quill between your fingers. It feels like brittle paper but smells of spicy, sweet warmth. In the ancient world, cinnamon wasn't just a kitchen staple. It was an emblem of luxury. Egyptian pharaohs imported cinnamon to embalm their dead, and in medieval Europe, cinnamon could cost more per ounce than gold. Obscure fact: some ancient Greeks believed that cinnamon was actually the bark of mythical dragon trees, guarded by winged serpents. You chuckle at the image, serpent guardians nestling in cinnamon groves, but scholars still argue over whether those legends were early marketing or genuine myth-making. As you wander among the cinnamon groves, you notice piles of discarded bark strips drying in the sun, their edges curling upward. A group of women fans them with palm fronds, keeping flies at bay. One of them brandishes a grated cinnamon scrap, demonstrating to you how a pinch, steeped in hot water, becomes a warming tea that soothes sore throats. You accept a cup. The infusion is golden brown, with a soothing tingle that warms your chest. It's easy to see why travelers prized cinnamon on long sea voyages. It prevented scurvy and fortified the spirit against salt spray and storms. You follow a narrow cart track down a gentle incline, the undergrowth closing in overhead until everything feels lush and claustrophobic. You brush aside vines to reveal an abandoned shrine, for stone pillars carved with floral motifs, now coated in moss. Peering inside, you find the remains of earthen lamps and a small stone lingam, evidence of age-old worship. Local legend holds that merchants would stop here to pay homage before loading their carts. They'd light a lamp, leave a pinch of cardamom pods, and ask for blessings of safe passage and fair prices. Historians are still debating whether these roadside shrines were a formal part of Hindu temple networks or loosely organized folk spots, but you feel the reverence that once filled this clearing. By afternoon, the humidity builds to a suffocating weight. You pause under a gum tree, wiping sweat from your brow as an elephant-like hornbill squawks overhead. Nearby, a wild boar snuffles through fallen leaves, its tusks gleaming in the dappled light. It nudges a cluster of cinnamon quills, then wanders off, uninterested in human scents. You watch it go, heart pounding with adrenaline, not fear. After all, you're here to learn, not to become lunch. Reaching the crest of a ridge, you find a narrow vista where you can see distant waves glinting beyond carpeted tea gardens. You step onto a flat rock and sit, inhaling the layered aromas of earth, spice, and wildflowers. In the distance, temple bells drift on the breeze, mingling with birdsong. It's the perfect spot for reflection, to consider how these spices, cardamom, cinnamon, ginger, once carried more value than coins, yet today blend so seamlessly into your morning chai that you might barely notice them. It's also a reminder that small things, like a humble spice, can shift the course of empires. Before descending, you examine the ground. Embedded in the soil are footprints of ancient traders who passed this way for centuries, each step leaving only a faint imprint, yet collectively forging a route that linked India to the far reaches of the known world. Obscure lore claims that some caravans once stole cardamom vines to cultivate them in distant lands, but attempts in the Roman Empire largely failed because the plants needed the Goths' unique climate. You tuck that nugget into your memory bank, another quirky insight to share by lamplight. Meanwhile, historians debate fiercely whether traders traded actual plants or just stories about their cultivation. The answer remains buried beneath layers of moss and centuries of dust. As the sun dips lower, you turn back down the trail, the dense forest now glowing in late afternoon light. You pass a small waterfall cascading into a jade pool, its tumbling waters echoing off stone walls. Here, you strip off your boots and dip your toes into the cool water, feeling the sharp bite of cardamom-infused mud against your skin. It's a playful reminder that while spices carried great weight in markets, they also infused every part of daily life, from cooking and medicine to art and ritual. By the time you return to the village at the trail's end, twilight is approaching. Farmers unload baskets of cardamom pods and cinnamon quills onto carts, their faces lit by lanterns swinging in the dusk. You hand back your empty jar, its peppercorns long since stashed away, and collect a small woven pouch filled with green cardamom as your keepsake. Tonight, you'll tuck those pods beside your pillow, letting their crisp scent guide you into dreams of forest trails and spice caravans. Walking home, you notice how the village fires cast a soft glow on palm-thatched roofs and the silhouettes of palm trees sway against the sky. A gentle breeze carries the mixed perfume of soot, spices, and sea salt. You pause, close your eyes, and breathe deeply, feeling the rainforest's pulse within your chest. It's in that moment you realize how intimately connected the forest's gifts are to the fortunes of Muziris and the world beyond. These rain-swept hills, dense with cardamom vines and cinnamon trees, you step onto the wide, sandy banks where the hidden lagoon meets the restless Arabian Sea, and immediately you're struck by the sacred hum of this shoreline. The morning air holds a faint mist that shimmers in the rising sun, and you find yourself walking barefoot along ancient stone ghats, steps carved into the earth centuries ago, each one polished smooth by the sandals of countless pilgrims and merchants. You inhale deeply. The air is tinged with salt, incense smoke, and the faint sharp bite of turmeric. Here, at the sacred shorelines of Muziris, commerce and cult are inseparable. As you wander down the first set of steps, you notice a small, open-air shrine tucked beneath a canopy of coconut palms. A softly carved granite relief of Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth and prosperity, peers serenely out to sea. Fresh marigold garlands drape around her shoulders, swaying gently in the breeze. A local priest kneels before the statue, gently rubbing bright yellow turmeric paste across the goddess's feet while chanting in low, rhythmic Sanskrit verses. You crouch beside him and offer a handful of rice grains, whispering a silent hope for safe passage and fair trade. Turmeric, locally called manjal, is more than a dye. It's believed to purify both object and soul. This practice of blessing ships with turmeric is documented in temple records dating back to at least the 3rd century CE, when the early Cherokees governed the Malabar Coast. Rising from your offering, you stroll toward a cluster of slender canoes drawn up on the sand. Their hulls are painted in bold stripes of red and white, each decorated with an eye motif at the prow, meant to ward off evil spirits and guide the vessel safely through churning waves. A second priest, this one wearing a garland of jasmine, dips a bundle of fresh incense sticks into a brass bowl of ghee, then ignites them before wafting the fragrant smoke over each boat. The incense is made from sandalwood imported from the distant Western Ghats, mixed with local camphor and powdered rose petals. You lean in to breathe, catching hints of sweet florals beneath smoky resin. Historians are still debating whether these incense blessing ceremonies spread along spice routes as religious syncretism or evolved independently among Kerala's coastal communities. Nearby, women in vibrant saris draw kolam patterns on flat, granite stones at the water's edge. Using rice flour, they intricately sketch concentric circles and lotus motifs, the white chalk standing out against reddish rock. You kneel to help, your fingers shaky as you trace a petal or two. Columns serve a practical purpose, too. The rice flour attracts small insects, symbolizing the cycle of reciprocity between humans and nature. Before boats depart, families believe that drawing kolam invites Lakshmi to bless the journey and grant prosperity to traders. It's a charming folk custom you won't find in many history books, though scholars have noted its significance in dozens of coastal villages up and down the Malabar coast. With the sun climbing higher, you follow a narrow path along the shore lined with low stone pylons, remnants of old warehouses and storage pits. Between those pillars, merchants once packed sacks of pepper, cardamom, and cinnamon before loading them onto waiting canoes. Now the pylons stand like silent sentinels, their surfaces etched with ancient graffiti, merchant names in Brahmi script, crude ship sketches, even a hastily carved footprint you swear belonged to a bold trader marking his territory. You crouch to trace one of the footprints with your fingertip. Petty as it seems, it reminds you that every traveler here left more than cargo behind. They left stories. Further down the beach, you encounter a larger stone platform topped by a massive lingam, an abstract form of Shiva. Its basalt surface is smooth from wear, and deep grooves at its base collect rainwater and votive offerings. You pour a small cup of cool lagoon water over the lingam, tasting its faint briny tang. Then you scatter rose petals and a pinch of black pepper around the base. Locals believe that Shiva in his ascetic form blesses both the land and sea, protecting mariners from tempests. It's a mainstream ritual still practiced in some Kerala fishing villages today, linking ancient Hindu rites to everyday life. Yet academics debate whether this particular lingam was originally installed by Brahmin priests or erected by merchant guilds seeking divine favor for their ventures. A few yards on, you reach a cleared courtyard where dozens of brass lamps stand on low stone pedestals. Each lamp holds a single wick floating on oil, often coconut oil infused with cloves and frankincense. You select an unlit lamp and dip your finger into ghee to brighten its wick, then whisper an invocation as you ignite it from a nearby flame. One by one, you place lamps in a careful radius around a carved peepal tree. When they're all lit, the courtyard glows like a constellation fallen to earth. It's said that lamps lit before departure guide boats safely back home, an echo of ancient lighthouse rituals that predate even classical Roman beacons. While the lamps burn, you hear the low hum of boat songs, chants sung by fishermen as they prepare their vessels. The melody rises and falls in time with waves breaking gently against the shore. You hum along, matching your breath to theirs. In, out, in, out. It's a ritual of synchronization, aligning human rhythm with nature's pulse. Obscure fact, some believe that these chants mimic the monsoon wind patterns, creating a vocal map that guides sailors out of hidden sandbars. Marine archaeologists have found scratch notations on rock walls near ancient ports suggesting early attempts at wind mapping, though historians are still debating whether those scratches were navigational aids or religious symbols. A company of traders arrives at the water's edge, a mix of local merchant families and foreign envoys. You watch as they kneel on coarse mats, placing gemstone beads, coins carved with Roman emperors' faces, and fragrant sandalwood boxes before a small shrine. A Tamil trader in a simple cotton dhoti dips his hand into a shallow copper bowl and sprinkles water over the offerings, murmuring a blessing for prosperous trade. A Greek envoy with a trimmed beard does the same, though he utters the words in a strange tongue, perhaps a melding of local dialect and Ionian Greek. The scene is a perfect image of cultural cross-pollination. Merchants from across the known world seeking divine sanction before risking their fortunes on the ocean. As midday approaches, the priestly rituals wind down. You make your way to a low pavilion made of coral stone where vendors sell devotional items. Tiny conch shells engraved with yantras, turmeric-dipped threads, and clay figurines of Varuna, the sea god. You pick up a small conch, noticing an ID etched into its lip, Potter's Guild. It reads in faint Tamil letters. Conches blown at sea were thought to calm storms, an audible prayer carried on the wind. Obscure rumor has it that some sailors would stow extra conches below deck to rattle them like ceremonial rattles if seas grew foul, though mainstream historians have yet to find solid evidence beyond a few scant mentions in travelers' logs. You wander back to the water's edge as the tide laps gently around your ankles. The canoes, which seemed so small moments ago, look grand now, each painted hull a testament to human ingenuity and faith. You climb aboard one, settling near a carved prow shaped like a lotus. A priest hands you a brass bowl filled with peppercorns soaked in holy water. You shake a few over your head, letting them rain down like blessed confetti. The pepper rolls beneath your feet, reminding you of Muziris's spice-driven destiny. As you drift with the tide, the shrine bells behind you chime in a syncopated rhythm. You close your eyes and feel every sensation. The bobbing of the boat, the taste of salt on your lips, the lingering fragrance of incense and turmeric. You sense that these sacred shorelines are more than a waypoint for goods. They're a liminal space where the divine and the mundane merge. Here, a trader's prayer is as vital as his cargo. A blessing as valuable as a bale of cinnamon. Eventually, you climb back onto dry land and stroll along a raised causeway that links the shoreline to the inland city. Weathered stone pillars march beside you, their capitals carved with lotus flowers and interlocking fish motifs, symbols of abundance and safe passage. You trace a fish scale pattern with your fingertip and feel oddly connected to the artisans who carved these stones so many lifetimes ago. It's a reminder. Every element of this port was imbued with care, from the carving of sacred symbols to the careful layering of paint on a boat's prow. By late afternoon, the rituals have given way to daily bustle. Hammocks are strung between palms for sailors to nap in the shade. Porters rest against crates of pepper while goats nibble at discarded turmeric stems. Conversations in at least 4 languages drift past you: Tamil, Greek, Aramaic, and early Malayalam. The air feels electric, charged by the interplay of faith, commerce, and culture. You pause at one final shrine, a simple stone pillar engraved with a trident symbol. It stands alone on a rocky outcrop where you can see the sun glint on distant waves. You pour another cup of water from your flask onto the base and sprinkle the last of your peppercorns around it, whispering a personal blessing. You breathe in deep and exhale. You step off the sun-warmed stones of the Ghat and onto a mire of churned mud where the first foreign footprints meet Kerala soil. The lagoon's edge is crowded now, heavy with gurgles of tidal water and the low thud of amphorae being rolled ashore. Ahead, a sleek Roman merchant galley slides into view, its crimson and gold-trimmed sails billowing in the light breeze. You glimpse the sandal-clad feet of its crew, thick-soled leather soled down through travel, the toes peeking out where straps fray, and you realize you're witnessing history in motion. Roman traders arriving hungry for black gold. Your heart races as you stride closer. The captain, draped in a white woolen tunic with a purple stripe, steps onto the makeshift plank, his eyes flicking over the milling crowd. He carries a small wooden chest, knotted closed with hemp rope, and the scent of dry figs and aged wine drifts from under its lid. You watch him press sandals into the squelchy clay, those distinct Roman soles leaving imprints side by side with your own barefoot marks. It's a tangible echo of cross-cultural contact. For centuries, traversing nearly 5,000 miles by sea, these traders have journeyed from the Tiber River to this hidden inlet. As you move alongside the captain, you notice how his crew unwinds coils of core rope and swings large clay amphorae ashore. Each vessel is stamped with the mark of its maker, a stylized wolf suckling Romulus and Remus, indelibly linking these wares to the heart of the empire. You step over a rope coil and crouch to touch an amphora's textured surface, feeling the coarse clay cool beneath your fingertips. Latin inscriptions, shallow grooves scratched before firing. Note the olive oil's vintage and origin. That's mainstream knowledge. By the 1st century CE, olive oil was one of Rome's most treasured spices, second only to pepper in value on the spice routes. Nearby, local porters and tamarind-skinned laborers bustle to unload baskets brimming with peppercorns, cardamom pods, and lengths of cinnamon quills. The Roman sailors crouch beside them, eyes bright, gathering handfuls of pepper to taste. You lean in to hear the captain chuckle as he plucks a single black pearl from a heap. He rolls it between his thumb and forefinger, then cracks it between his teeth. The sharp, tangy heat makes his nostrils flare before he nods in approval. Optimum, he murmurs in clipped Latin. Excellent. In fact, Roman gourmands sprinkled pepper on everything from boiled dormice to fish sauce, and socialist etiquette demanded both guest and host sample the pepper at feasts to show goodwill. Beyond this sensory exchange, you see Romans presenting gifts. Bracelets of amber glinting in the sun, glass goblets colored deep cobalt, even carved pieces of elephant ivory, more precious here than gold. Local chieftains in white mundu receive them with respectful nods, offering in return ceramic jars of fermented palm wine and bundles of freshly roasted turmeric roots. The reciprocity is striking. Obscure fact: Roman writers sometimes mention purple gold, a mixture of saffron and copper to mimic imperial Tyrian purple, suggesting that some goods arriving here were as much about display as sustenance. Historians are still debating this question. Did such ostentatious items truly circulate in Muziris, or were they limited to elite circles far from the coastal chaos? You push onward, weaving between hulking ship components and smaller craft. A group of Syrian Christian merchants, recognizable by the crosses embroidered on their tunics, haggle in Aramaic with local spice brokers. You catch fragments: marn, kamir, pepper and wine. Nearby, Arab sailors from Oman stroke their beards as they inspect ivory tusks for hidden wormholes. Their long dhows rock gently as the tide shifts, sails stowed and rolled for inspection. This confluence of tongues and customs makes your head spin. Tamil, Greek, Latin, Aramaic, and early Malayalam all rise and fall in rapid-fire negotiation. It's a living polyglot scene illustrating how Muziris truly was a melting pot of the ancient world. Midday sun turns the lagoon silvery, and you shrug off your outer robe to reveal a simple cotton tunic, its hem damp with sweat. You scent a whiff of spiced wine fermenting at a nearby stall, locals mixing palm wine with crushed ginger and honey for visiting dignitaries. You approach and accept a wooden cup, inhaling the syrupy aroma. The spiced concoction tastes warm and slightly sour, fortifying you against the tropical heat. It's a mainstream practice. Traders often fortified local wine with spices to preserve it during long voyages, and archaeological digs at coastal sites have uncovered large vats once used for such mixtures. While you sip, you overhear talk of exotic rumors. Metal ships so large they swallow villages whole. Glowing eyes carved into figureheads that ward off sea monsters, and a Roman sage who claimed he could navigate by the scent of spices alone. You laugh to yourself, until you notice a battered clay tablet resting on a merchant's stall inscribed with archaic Greek letters. You kneel and read the faint script, a passenger's log listing departures and arrivals, pepper quotas, and even notes on sea snakes spotted near Socotra. It's an obscure discovery, a genuine traveler's logbook preserved in cracked clay. Yet academics still argue over whether this tablet originates from Al-Haramat merchants trading en route, or if it was crafted locally to formalize trade agreements. The provenance remains contested. Turning from the tablet, you join a small group of local fishermen who've gathered to hear the captain's tales. In refined Greek, he describes shipboard life, the rolling of the sea as a lullaby, the dangers of piracy off the Somali coast, and the furious winds of the monsoon you experienced in Muziris just months ago. The fishermen listen, enraptured. Out here, the line between fact and tall tale blurs like the horizon at dusk. These stories mirror the periplus of the Erythraean Sea, an anonymous merchant guide from the mid-1st century CE that names Muziris as a key spice hub. Historians are still debating whether the periplus refers directly to today's Patinum site or another long-lost harbor. But no matter, you feel the periplus come alive in this very moment. As afternoon wanes, you wander along the quay lined with foreign wares, Persian silk bolts shimmering violet and gold, Bactrian lapis lazuli stones polished smooth, Greek bronze statues no taller than your hand depicting Dionysus mid-drunken stomp. You pause at one statue, its curling beard and grape cluster crown so lifelike you half expect it to wink. Small indulgence, you mutter, imagining it once perched on a Roman dining table as both decoration and conversation starter. You pocket a tiny fragment of glaze fallen from its base, a pocket treasure, if slightly illicit. By the time the sun tilts low, casting long shadows across the mudflats, merchant ships are being lashed down for the night. You stand on a raised platform fashioned from driftwood, watching porters bundle crates of pepper and cardamom before rolling them towards stacked warehouses. The Romans gather on deck, lighting small oil lamps that flicker in the growing dusk. Their lantern-light reflections dance on rippling water, creating the illusion of floating stars, an optical trick sailors prized as a good omen. Before you leave the quay, you kneel and press your hands into the damp mud, leaving your own imprint alongside Roman sandals. It's a fleeting moment. You step into the sprawling maze of Muziris's central bazaar, where every stall teems with color, clamor, and the heady perfume of dozens of spices vying for your attention. The air hums with argument and laughter, the scrape of cloth, and the rhythmic clink of scales. This is where the real magic and the real mayhem happens, barter and brouhaha. You weave through narrow lanes barely wide enough for two laden porters to pass shoulder to shoulder. On your left, a towering stack of woven palm baskets overflows with black peppercorns, each glistening ebony sphere a promise of profit. Opposite, a merchant in a crimson turban arranges cinnamon quills in spiraling pyramids, each curl as perfect as a royal crown. Between them, sacks of turmeric dust glow like molten gold, and ginger rhizomes lie braided into ropes waiting for buyers to slice off a length. You feel like a kid in a candy store, if that candy store smelled like curry and sounded like a wrestling match. A stout trader in a linen dhoti leans forward over his wares and calls out to you, "Pepper, finest for your pickles and your fish sauce. 2 for 1 denarius. You raise an eyebrow. 2 peppercorns for a single Roman coin? You know from classical sources that during the 1st century CE, a single denarius roughly equaled a day's wage for a common laborer. If you took that offer, you'd be trading your entire week's earnings for a measly handful of pepper. You shake your head and continue, knowing better than to be dazzled by a headline price. The next stall, run by a handsomely beaded Nabatean merchant, advertises cardamom pods smuggled downriver that morning. He beckons you close. "For you, friend, I give you 4 pods for a denarius. Drink them in your wine tonight and dream of Rome." You sniff the velvet-smooth pods, each one like a tiny orb of forest dew, and imagine how the emperor's chefs would swoon at their cost. Yet customs records reveal that Romans often paid a 25% duty on spices arriving from India, meaning your final price would be even higher once the harbor tax was added. Still, you can't help but slip 2 pods into your pouch. They're worth every sip of hot water later. A short distance on, you overhear a quarrel erupt. A silver-haired local spice broker is accusing a Greek investor of passing off-course, sand-filled pepper as premium grade. The Greek, draped in an elegant chlamys, counters in broken Malayalam, "I assure you, friend, there is no sand, only the purest spice." The broker slaps his empty palm on a low table, scattering a few stray grains. "This tastes gritty, like beach sand. I won't pay for pebbles." The crowd laughs as the Greek lord attempts to lick a peppercorn clean, his mustache bristling. Market brawls over adulteration were so common that Roman statutes sometimes included clauses punishing sellers who mixed sand or sawdust with pepper. You tuck that into your mental filing cabinet under merchant scrapes. Turning a corner, you discover a quieter alcove where a Jain trader meticulously arranges a ledger of brass weights and bronze balances. He's trading cloves imported from the Maluku Islands in Southeast Asia, an obscure fact that hints at routes far beyond the Arabian Sea. Cloves were rarer than pepper and commanded twice the price, yet they appear only sporadically in Muziris inventories. Scholars are still debating whether cloves traveled via direct Indian Ocean crossings or through a relay of Arabian and Persian middlemen. You glance at his gleaming balances. One side holds a brass weight stamped 20 grams, the other a heaping spoonful of dried flower buds. The subtle aroma of clove oil tingles in your nostrils, and you promise yourself a pinch at day's end. Ahead, a tall Arab dhow captain in flowing white robes is bartering with a Tamil spice family. Their negotiation weaves between Aramaic and Tamil, each side gesturing wildly. You slip close enough to catch phrases, 50 denarii, 30, no 40, fine cinnamon, no dust. This back-and-forth haggling is the essence of barter. Neither side knows the exact value until voices rise in competition. Although coinage circulated, Roman denarii, South Indian copper coins, Arabian drams, major deals often relied on commodity exchange. You recall that in inland Kerala, pepper was sometimes measured in fingers, a handful, rather than weighed, complicating transactions. In this bazaar, you realize trust is the real currency. You wander past a cheerful Jewish merchant, his dark eyes sparkling behind a basket of saffron threads, so red they seem to glow. Saffron, harvested from the tiny stigmas of Crocus sativus, was prized for dyeing and medicine. Medieval texts later claimed saffron could cure depression and heal wounds. Yet ancient references are scarce. It's an obscure tidbit that saffron's trade in Muziris may have peaked only briefly before Persian traders cornered the market further west. Today, you marvel at the delicate flowers dried here, their fragrance faint but persistent. A sudden trumpet stab rings out, a brass shell horn blares, and 3 porters carry down a carved teak chest sealed with wax. They announce a royal consignment, banners flying above wooden carts stamped with the Chera emblem. A bow and arrow crossed over a crescent moon. You push closer as the chest is placed before a silver-haired merchant wearing an elaborately embroidered mundu. He taps the wax seal with a jeweled ring, its garnet flickering. "Open," he commands, and slaves heave the lid away. Inside gleams a trove of gold coins minted under King Cheiran Shingudavan, each embossed with his profile and the legend Chera Rex. It's a mainstream historical note that indigenous kingdoms minted their own bullion by the 2nd century CE, signaling political as well as economic power. You count a few coins slipping into appreciative palms. The crowd surges forward, jockeying for a look. You catch glimpses of other treasures. Tiny coral beads, polished ivory combs, and glazed ceramic bowls painted with lotus motifs. These luxury items underline how Muziris was not only a spice hub but also a center for global luxury trade. Obscure rumor has it that some elites used peppercorns as punctuation in handwritten scrolls, the tiny black beads marking sentence ends, though mainstream texts never mention this practice, leaving it squarely in the realm of local folklore. Nearby, a Greek rhetorician stands on a crate and declaims in practiced oratory. He extols the virtues of Roman law and civility, then shifts to praising Kerala's spice riches. "Imagine," he cries, "a land where pepper grows wild, where every tree whispers wealth." The oration draws applause, but you notice skeptics rolling their eyes. Some argue that such performances were mere propaganda to sell high-priced consular gifts sent from Rome. Historians still debate whether these rhetoricians traveled widely or operated mostly within diasporic merchant communities. You duck into a narrow corridor between 2 warehouses, where local laborers are loading a massive wooden chest onto a bullock cart. The chest bears the emblem of the Guild of Pepper Merchants, a powerful association that regulated quality and even resolved disputes. Guild inscriptions found on pillars in Patnam suggest that these merchant coalitions held quasi-judicial powers, an intriguing hint at proto-corporate governance in antiquity. Yet scholars are still arguing how centralized these guilds actually were. Did they govern all spice trade across the Malabar Coast? Or were they localized entities within each port? You pause to run your hand over the chest's carved panels, where grapevine motifs mingle with palm fronds, a visual testament to trade's fusion of foreign and local artistry. Emerging back into sunlight, you hear laughter from a group gathered around a makeshift stage. A pair of jesters reenact a bartering scene, complete with exaggerated haggles and tumbling pepper sacks. The audience howls as one jester pretends to spike peppercorns with ground rice to cheat a gullible buyer, only to get pummeled. Light-hearted satire born from genuine market anxieties. You grin, realizing that humor has always been a release valve for traders under stress. As the afternoon wears on, the sun beating down turns the market's earthen floors into dry dust. You find a shaded corner by a teak column and crack open your handheld pouch of cardamom. You chew one pod, the cooling heat racing across your tongue, then pass the rest through the crowd, eliciting grateful nods and half-muffled moans of relief. Cardamom's digestive properties were well known. Roman medical texts prescribed it for indigestion and to freshen breath, a mainstream medicinal use that still continues in many parts of Asia today. You rise and wander toward the edge of the bazaar where an array of tiny animal figurines is displayed. Elephants, rhinos, even sea turtles carved from bone and painted with natural dyes. These tokens were sold as good luck charms for sailors, believed to ensure safe passage. Obscure tradition held that slipping a turtle figurine into your pocket would calm storms, though there's no hard evidence beyond travelers' anecdotes. You pick up a miniature rhino, its horn chipped, and imagine it once perched on a deck railing, nodding through spray and wind. Finally, you leave the central stalls and step onto a raised stone platform where weary merchants gather to tally their day's transactions. The platform's edge is carved. You step aboard a sturdy dhow moored at the edge of the lagoon, its teak planks still damp from dawn's spray. The salty breeze tousles your hair as you climb the ladder onto the deck, where a group of grizzled mariners unfurl a large, weathered map on a low wooden table. It's not the sort of parchment you'd hang in a study. This chart is drawn on cured palm leaves, stitched together with core twine, the edges curling like dried banana peels. You lean over, trying not to wobble as the boat rocks, and trace the curving lines that slash across the brownish-yellow surface. These are the trade routes of the southwest monsoon, the lifeblood of Muziris's maritime empire. The mapmakers, part navigator, part storyteller, point to a series of symbols inked in faded charcoal. Arrows signify wind direction from May through September. Dotted lines mark the reverse current that sweeps back from October to April. You discover that Indian Ocean sailors long ago unlocked the monsoon's secret cycle, transforming unpredictable seas into a seasonal expressway. It's one of those mainstream historical facts you can't miss. Without harnessing the monsoons, ancient ships would have tacked back and forth for months, goods rotting in hold. By riding the southwest winds down to the Horn of Africa and returning home on the northeast breezes, merchants turned voyages that once took half a year into round trips of mere weeks. Yet this knowledge wasn't carved in stone. It evolved through centuries of trials, errors, and, occasionally, outright disasters. Here, on deck under a sky painted with early sunlight, you learn that each map is a living document. Mariners add notes about hidden shoals or whirlpools, sketch rough islets where fresh water gushes after storms, and mark the spot where the Porali sharks are said to circle before the monsoon's first gust. Obscure as it sounds, they believe these sharks appear only when the wind is about to shift, an olfactory barometer of wet earth you'd never spot on a modern weather chart. Few scientists mention this, but it's a quirky nugget passed down in hushed tones around evening fires. One of the navigators lifts a simple wooden instrument from the table. It's shaped like a small rectangle with a hole drilled near one corner and a string knotted through it, known to Arabs as a kamal. You hold it to your eye, letting a section of string slide through your fingers until the lower edge of the rectangle aligns with the horizon and the top edge touches a bright star. The length of string remaining gives you a rough measure of latitude. It's astonishingly basic, yet centuries before astrolabes or sextants, this kamal helped sailors maintain course across open water. Historians are still debating this question. Did Indian Ocean mariners develop the kamal independently, Or was it introduced by Arabian traders during early medieval voyages? Beside the camal rests a small lead weight, a sounding lead, tied to a rope marked at fathom intervals. The lead is molded with an indentation into which beeswax is pressed. You ask why, and they explain. When the lead hits the seabed, bits of sand or shell adhere to the wax, revealing the bottom's composition. That way, navigators could tell when they neared shallow banks or shifting silt. It's an obscure technique, no Roman text spends much time on it, but here it's as vital as knowing your star positions. You grin as you imagine the captain chuckling when he hauled up a load of sticky marsh mud instead of clean sand, muttering to himself about muddy profits. Turning back to the palm leaf chart, you see clusters of tiny shell inlays marking prominent ports. Barbarican near the Indus, the bustling harbors of Aden, and here, Muziris, a modest dot encircled by merchant guild symbols. Each shell is a mnemonic device. White cowrie shells for safe harbors, black shells for reefs to avoid. You run your fingertip along the curves, feeling the ridges left by the charcoal and the smooth spots polished by generations of fingertips. It's tactile history, far more intimate than any textbooks you've leafed through. As the sun climbs, a hush falls over the deck. The head navigator closes his eyes and holds a bronze disc, a primitive gnomon, upright on the table. He watches the tiny shadow it casts on a carved circle of concentric rings, noting the time of day within half an hour. These scratch mark logs, inscribed daily on a small wooden plank, help determine sunrise and sunset times, crucial for timing departures to catch the earliest monsoon gusts. It's one thing to know the winds blow south in May, another to be precisely on the water before the breeze slackens. You squint at the disk's shadow and wonder if you'd ever manage to read it without seasickness turning you green. Beyond technical devices, you learn the art of reading the sea itself. The mariners point out subtle cues. The direction of surface ripples that betray underlying currents, the pattern of whitecaps predicting a fresh breeze, and even the murmur of waves breaking against distant shoals, a sound carried over water like a whispered secret. You close your eyes to listen, wishing you could bottle each hint of wave crash and whisper it into your dreams. Once, a sailor recalls, he judged a monsoon's arrival by cloud's shape. Giant cumulus towering to the south signaled the onset of the southwest monsoon within 3 days. Modern meteorologists treat such folk memories skeptically, but in these waters they were once the best forecast available. As midday approaches, you join the navigators in a small cabin just below deck. A narrow slit allows a line of sunlight to strike a rough-hewn table strewn with charcoal sticks, fresh palm leaves, and a battered copper inkpot. One mariner dips a quill into the ink, made from coconut soot mixed with tree resin, and traces new notations on an extra leaf. Large floating log at 6 degrees north, 75 degrees east. Sighting of cross-shaped constellation at midnight, bearing an E by N. He adds a whimsical doodle of a turtle alongside the note, perhaps marking the mythic turtle charm sail you witnessed on shore. You ask why they bother mapping stars so far south, where Polaris dips below the horizon. The navigator laughs. He points out that although Polaris is faint here, the Southern Cross and other southerly stars are perfect guides. Some ancient texts ignore this because Western-centric chroniclers assumed only Northern Hemisphere navigation mattered. Scholars are still debating this question. Did early Mediterranean sailors have any inkling of southern constellations, or was this star lore entirely homegrown among Indian Ocean mariners? Emerging from the cabin back onto deck, you see the horizon shimmering with midday heat. The captain strides forward, pointing to a chain of cloud-tipped islands on the western horizon. That's where the winds begin to shift, he says, his voice low with excitement. We leave before sunset, riding the breeze like a kite. You restrain a grin, though the idea of being catapulted across open ocean at the mercy of wind gusts sounds a bit like signing up for a roller coaster over boiling lava. You settle beside a barrel of water covered with cloth to keep out bugs, sipping through a coconut shell cup. The sailors describe how they fatten their sails with resin to keep moisture at bay and line the seams with coir to prevent leaks. Obscure fact: they sometimes mixed fish oil into the resin to ward off marine worms that burrow into wooden seams. The scent of fish oil mingles with wood and salt, an aroma no perfumer would dare bottle. As the afternoon wanes, you pace the deck with the navigator, watching the wind flags snap with growing vigor. He retrieves a palm leaf calendar, a thin strip marked with the Malayalam months and corresponding monsoon dates. You see that the local handwritten estimate predicts the southwest monsoon will roar in on the 10th day of Karkitikam, around late June. Yet the Persian almanac says mid-July. Here again, historians are still debating this question. Whether ancient seafarers relied on indigenous lunar solar calendars or incorporated Hellenistic astronomical tables brought by Greek traders. The breeze picks up, tugging at your robes and whipping stray hair across your face. You grip the rail as the dhow begins to edge away from the lagoon's mouth, the fresh water giving way to the deeper blue of the Arabian Sea. The navigator stands on the bow, kamal in hand, scanning the sky for reference stars. Each sailor moves with practiced ease. One shouts orders to furl a sail, another heaves in a length of rope, and the captain gives a final nod. You feel your heart pitch forward in excitement and dread. This is no gentle lagoon now, but the open ocean, guided by charts scrawled on palm leaves and the timeless rhythm of monsoon winds. Before darkness falls, the dhow is cruising smooth, the sails filled like great white lungs. You tilt your head skyward, seeking the first star to guide tomorrow's course. The navigator taps your shoulder, pointing to the Southern Cross, a tiny constellation blazing above the prow. You trace its shape, committing it to memory. A celestial navigational beacon linking you to countless sailors who charted these same skies centuries ago. That night, as you sleep in a hammock tied between the mast and the cabin bulkhead, you dream of ancient mariners bending over salted maps, quills scratching in rhythm with ocean swells, and the whisper of coconut sails billowing in full monsoon. You drift on that timeless arc of wind and water, knowing that these monsoon mapmakers didn't just draw lines on palm leaves. They wove together knowledge from earth, sea, and sky to turn chaos into commerce. Dark clouds roll in from the southwest, their swollen bellies lit from within by forked flashes of distant lightning. The sky above Muziris darkens in a wash of gunmetal gray, and the coastline trembles as the first rumbles of thunder echo through the coconut groves. A sharp shift in the sea breeze sends ripples across the lagoon's mirror, and you tighten your grip on the rail of the anchored dhow. Today, the monsoon shows its ferocious side, and you are about to witness tempest trials. A sailor scrambles along the deck, reefing the billowing sails with practiced urgency. You step forward, the teak planks slick beneath your sandals, and pass him a coil of rope to secure the mast. Around you, crewmates shout orders in a chorus of Tamil and broken Greek, each voice straining to be heard over the wind's rising howl. In these moments, you feel the centuries of maritime lore humming beneath your feet. Ancient mariners knew these storms could peak at gale force, with sustained winds over 40 knots, capable of ripping plaster from temple walls ashore. Classical writers like Arian warn of the monsoon's sudden fury, recounting how vessels could founder in minutes when caught unprepared. Your heart pounds as you lash the last loose halyard. A sheet of rain hammers the deck, sending sharp stabs of cold through your cotton tunic. You duck beneath the mizzen boom and watch the lagoon transform. Waves swell into jagged peaks, their crests whipped into froth that smacks against the hull in thunderous applause. Historically, Muziris' shipbuilders planned for these onslaughts. Their vessels were lashed together with core rope, coconut fiber known for elasticity, which allowed hulls to flex under stress rather than splinter. It's a mainstream fact geeky sailors boast about around midnight watches, and you nod as you recall how archaeologists uncovered coir-matted timbers at Patnam, confirming ancient texts' praise of local seamanship. Lightning forks overhead, and you hear the scream of a storm petrel spiraling down toward the water. It's said these birds herald tempest's heart. When they circle the rigging, the worst is near. On some ships, sailors kept a handful of mice below deck, noting how they hunkered into nests to warn of low-pressure systems. It's an obscure superstition rarely recorded in official logs, but among seamen it persisted, so much so that in parts of the Mediterranean, captains paid extra to transport trained cats whose twitching whiskers signaled barometric shifts. You glance down at the cramped forecastle, half expecting a feline meteorologist to appear. The rain intensifies, turning the sail's canvas into a silver sheet that strains under the wind's pull. Crew members cling to shrouds like spiders on a web, hollering about fractured lines and snapped battens. You leap into action, grabbing a length of wet hemp and tying a reef knot faster than you thought possible. The deck pitches beneath you, each roll a rolling drumbeat that sings of danger. According to the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, Muziris's traders sometimes lost entire cargoes, hundreds of amphorae or sacks of pepper, to sudden squalls. Historians estimate that 1 in 4 voyages never returned, swallowed by monsoon's wrath before spice reached foreign shores. A cascade of water surges over the rail, drenching your legs and flooding the bilge. You scramble to the helm, where the captain wrestles with the wheel, his face a mask of grim concentration. Lightning lights his profile in stroboscopic bursts, outlining salt-crusted locks and the tight set of his jaw. You sidle up to him and secure a backup line, locking it around a cleat on the deck. Together you heave in unison, steering the prow into the waves rather than letting them strike broadside. A maneuver ancient texts call breasting the sea, designed to keep the bow from yawing and throwing the crew into chaos. Between gusts, you glimpse the coral reefs hidden beneath the churning surface, ghostly shapes that could shred a hull in seconds if you veered off course. The sounding lead dangles from a battered line, and you swing it over the rail, counting fathoms as the weight hits the bottom. 5, 6, 7. It's deeper than yesterday's chart promised. The bottom composition is a coarse sand, revealed by grains stuck in the beeswax indentation on the lead. That technique, nearly forgotten in scholarly circles, was once vital for avoiding hidden banks and anchoring safely. Today, you feel a profound connection to those early navigators who first discovered this method by trial and error. The storm's violence peaks as the wind shifts violently, gusting from the northeast at a wild 35 knots. Rain slashes your cheeks like whips, and the deck tilts at an angle that robs you of balance. The mizzen mast groans, and you fear its timbers will splinter under the load. The captain calls out in clipped Aramaic, a language you barely parse, but the tone needs no translation. He orders you to secure the main sheet. Muscles flexing, you haul until your arms tremble, sweat mixing with rain and salt. Historically, vessel crews numbered 30 to 40 men, enough hands to fight the storm. Yet records suggest that despite manpower, many vessels lashed to Muziris's jetties were torn from moorings and dashed against rocks. Some sailors carried metal trumpets sealed with cloth, known as bull roarers, to produce low-frequency hum that supposedly soothed nerves during storms. You flick through a mental note you jotted earlier. The odd practice of creating droning vibrations to lull both man and beast, thought to emulate the monsoon's deep rumble. It feels absurd, yet in the heart of this chaos you wouldn't put anything past desperate crews. Mainstream accounts dismiss such rituals, but here, between howling wind and sloshing decks, you appreciate every edge, every whisper of hope. Just as suddenly as it began, the storm's core seems to pass overhead. The wind slackens. Thunder moves off toward the open sea. Rain continues in near-vertical sheets, but the spray is gentler, the waves retreating to rolling swells. You exhale a breath you didn't realize you'd been holding, your shoulders dropping from taut to trembling. The deck is littered with broken sails and flotsam, and you catch sight of a smashed amphora rolling across the planks, its garlic-scented contents oozing out in reddish slurry. In the eerie calm that follows, you join the crew in hauling up the sounding lead one last time. Its wax is caked with shells and dark silt, a reminder of the tempest's path beneath the keel. You unwrap it and let the wax catch droplets of rain, softening as it surrenders its secrets. Then you help clear the deck, tossing torn canvas and snapped timbers overboard, where they bob away like driftwood in a shallow pond. Daylight fractures the cloud ceiling at last, sending pale beams onto the battered hull. You climb the mizzen mast, each footfall creaking against soaking wood, to braid a fresh line from core strands. Below, the crew works with muted energy, their faces drawn but determined, mending tears in canvas and patching decks with resin mixed from coconut oil and pine sap. Another ingenious adaptation that keeps wood from swelling and splitting. Once the immediate danger subsides, you taste the lingering tension in the air. Even dolphins, usually fearless, dance at a distance, their sleek bodies darting through the troughs rather than the peaks. You recall an obscure tale, Legends spoke of sea nymphs who calm the waves after storms, slipping into kelp beds and singing lullabies only the bravest sailors could hear. No scholar in Alexandria writes of such beings, but you wouldn't bet against myths when you've watched the sea come alive in anger. Back on shore, local priests perform post-tempest puja at the sacred shorelines. You watch them extinguish floodlit oil lamps and scatter peppercorns into the swirled waters, asking deities to soothe the turbulent mind. These rituals blend Vedic chants with coastal folk practices. Another point scholars debate whether the chants here belong to ancient pan-Indian traditions or local Dravidian rites adopted over centuries. That evening, as you help unload the surviving cargo, cracked amphorae of olive oil, partially crushed cinnamon quills, soggy sacks of turmeric, you feel the weight of loss and survival balancing in equal measure. The port's labyrinth of warehouses and jetties creaks under the strain of salvage operations. Men carry bundles of pepper up the ghats to dry in the smoky glow of lanterns. Children run barefoot through puddles, collecting stray grains of cardamom dropped in the frenzy. You slip away to a quiet corner behind a ruined warehouse, pulling from your pouch a single waterlogged peppercorn. You roll it between your fingers, noting how its taste has softened, the spicy bite mellowed by salt and sea. You chew it slowly, savoring the reminder that even in devastation, spices endure, tiny repositories of memory and resilience. Night falls and you climb into a hammock strung between two coconut palms. The air has cooled, and the lagoon hums softly, its surface still rippling from the storm's aftershocks. You drift as waves of exhaustion wash over you, each pulse echoing the ancient challenges faced by seafarers who first charted these waters. Somewhere deep in your dreams, you hear the crash of thunder, but it's distant now. No longer a threat, but a lullaby calling you into sleep. Along the ragged edge of the Malabar shoreline, dunes rise and fall like restless sleepers, their golden crests shaped by every breath of the Arabian Sea. Morning light slants across the sand, illuminating half-buried keys and coral blocks that once formed Muziris's bustling waterfront. Beneath the wind-whipped sands lie the silent remains of docks where wooden beams rotted away centuries ago, leaving only their stone foundations to be claimed by migrating dunes. Here, at shifting sands, the coastline itself erodes history, each grain a fragment of a vanished empire. A narrow pathway winds between towering Barkhan dunes, their horns pointing inland as if inching toward the city's ancient center. Footprints from earlier wanderers are half erased by morning breezes, reminding you how fleeting human traces are against nature's slow, persistent drift. Geologists estimate that this stretch of coast retreats by roughly half a meter per decade due to longshore drift and rising sea levels, a mainstream finding confirmed by core samples drilled inland. Each decade, stone pillars once flush with water spark silent testimony to the sea's inexorable advance. Venturing down a low-lying saddle between dunes, glimpses of emerald mangrove saplings emerge through the sand. Their stilt-like roots capture silt carried by monsoon floods, building up tiny islands that drift over generations, only to be submerged again by storm surges. Within these tidal channels, broken pottery shards from amphorae and terracotta jars jostle against bubbling mud. A curious fact often overlooked: mollusk shells harvested in these mangroves were crushed into lime for early mortar, meaning the very sands that bury Muziris also built its architecture. Farther along, the sand gives way to a battered stone causeway, its surface pocked by erosion and fracturing. This causeway once linked the central market to the main quays, but now only scattered coral blocks remain. As you step carefully across the uneven stones, it's easy to imagine porters shouldering sacks of pepper and cardamom, their feet pounding rhythms into the rocks. Archaeological surveys have revealed the causeway's base extends nearly 100 meters offshore, an engineering feat that speaks to ancient trade scale. But scholars are still debating whether it was abandoned due to gradual sediment silting or destroyed by a single catastrophic flood event in the 6th century CE. Midday sun glares overhead as you reach the heart of the dune field, where wind-driven ripples create an illusion of lunar terrain. Occasional gusts lift fine sand into whispering tornadoes that dance across the surface, erasing footprints and leaving new patterns in their wake. You crouch to examine one such swirl. It resembles a spiral galaxy carved into the desert. Obscure lore claims that local sailors believed these sand spirals were spun by spirits guiding lost traders back to shore. Modern historians dismiss the ritualistic interpretation but acknowledge that such legends helped mariners navigate shifting landmarks. Beyond the dunes you discover a collapsed warehouse platform, its coral blocks strewn like tombstones. Pockets of red clay beneath the platform hint at deeper stratigraphic layers. Some researchers argue that this clay represents deposits from a massive tsunami, possibly triggered by an undersea earthquake near Sri Lanka, burying the port under meters of sediment. Others contend the clay resulted from repeated Perrier floods, noting historical chronicles from surrounding kingdoms record catastrophic inundations in 1000 CE and 1341 CE that reshaped Kerala's waterways. The debate rages on tsunami or floodplain evolution. A short distance away, the inlet's old shoreline slants into a shallow lagoon now choked with silt and reed beds. As you wade through knee-deep brackish water, ceramic fragments crunch underfoot. Rim pieces from storage jars, shards of decorated plates. Even now, the tide washes new relics onto the bare substrate. Delving into the mud, you unearth a small limestone seal stamped with a bow and arrow motif, likely belonging to a Chera merchant guild. That emblem appears in stone inscriptions at inland sites, suggesting these guilds coordinated both local trade and ritual offerings. Historians disagree, however, on whether such seals were used primarily for taxation or as religious talismans. An academic conundrum still unresolved. Climbing onto a sandstone outcrop, you survey the broader landscape. To the south, the Periyar River's mouth has migrated over centuries. Its shifting delta redirecting sediment flows into new bays and smothering ancient anchorages. Satellite imagery shows the river now enters the sea several kilometers from Muziris's original port, corroborating local oral traditions about lost rivers that nourished the city. Yet some map scholars warn against placing too much weight on folklore. They emphasize the need for precise geochronological data, which remains scant, leaving reconstruction of past coastlines an inexact science. The afternoon heat pushes you toward a relic of hydraulic engineering, a basalt drain channel carved into bedrock. It once whisked monsoon runoff into the sea, protecting the inner city from floods. Now its channel is clogged with sand and mangrove litter. Kneeling, you clear a section until brackish water trickles freely. It's humbling to consider the labor invested by ancient engineers who bored through volcanic rock with iron chisels. An acknowledgement of both the ingenuity and communal effort underpinning Muziris. Scholars still debate whether such infrastructure projects were commissioned by monarchs or funded by merchant guild levies. Returning to the dunes, you encounter scattered clusters of bleached bones, remnants of cattle and goats sacrificed during temple ceremonies. Local villagers say these bones were left as offerings to the sea goddess, an obscure tradition not widely recorded in temple epigraphs. The coastal deity's worship involved tossing animal bones into the surf to appease storms, complementing the more formal puja rituals conducted in inland sanctuaries. Anthropologists argue about the origins of this practice, some linking it to Dravidian fertility rites, others to transient Tamil merchant cults. A sudden gust lifts a curtain of sand, and you shield your eyes. When it passes, you notice a vertical stone slab, half-buried and carved with lotus and fish scale motifs. It's likely part of a temple gopuram gateway that once stood sentinel over the harbor. Temple inscriptions mention stone carvings depicting marine life and dolphins, symbols of safe passage, but none describe what happened when the shoreline swallowed the temple whole. Conservators debate whether to excavate these structures fully or leave them in situ to preserve the fragile stratigraphy above. As dusk approaches, the dune's colors deepen into rose and ochre. You follow the sound of trickling water to a collapsed freshwater well once used by sailors to refill barrels before departure. The well's stone lining tilts at a precarious angle, its mouth choked with sand and fallen fronds. Nearby, a rusted bucket lies nearby, still attached to a corroded chain. In ancient times, wells like this were lined with lime mortar made from burnt oyster shells, a fact that surprised early archaeologists when they analyzed mortar samples. It was one of those aha moments highlighting local resourcefulness. Yet some conservationists argue such details are too ephemeral to guide modern reconstructions. Night falls quickly in the tropics, and you kindle a small fire at the dune's base. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows across the rippled sand, shaping phantom walls of distant structures. As embers glow, elders from a nearby fishing hamlet join you, sharing stories of ghost jetties glimpsed under moonlight, pale outlines of submerged stone pillars visible during full tide. These tales, dismissed as superstition by some historians, are corroborated by occasional dives that reveal coral-encrusted walls beneath shallow water. Whether these relics align with accounts of Muziris or pertain to later port settlements remains subject to scholarly dispute. Embers still glowing, you look back toward the dunes and imagine their silent march over centuries, obliterating the finest carved columns and the heaviest amphorae alike. Each grain of sand is a time capsule, a fragment of pottery here, a splinter of wood there, all drifting in ceaseless motion. As you lie down on a woven mat lashed atop a low dune, the breeze carries a whispering hiss, sand sliding down leeward slopes, reclaiming its lost territory. Wrapped in a light cotton throw, you allow the dune's slow cadence to lull you to sleep. Through dreams, you travel beneath the sand's surface, tracing buried corridors, glimpsing long-gone traders and pilgrims. And when dawn breaks, you will awaken to find fresh ripples across the dunes, the landscape subtly altered once again. But the story of these shifting sands, where nature and history entwine, will endure in every grain that slips through your fingers. In the heart of Muziris's merchant quarter, opulence and ruin stand side by side. Carved teak doorways open onto courtyards ringed with marble columns, their capitals painted in saffron hues that catch the afternoon sun. Here, in one lavish mansion, you find the family of Menander of the Pepper Guild, nicknamed the Pepper Princes. Their fortunes swell with every sack of black gold that arrives from inland plantations, and wealth has bought them both grand palaces and whispered envy. Yet just beyond the high walls and perfumed gardens, paupers, once prosperous spice farmers, wander empty-handed through dusty lanes, their lives undone by a single bad harvest or a storm that drowned their vines. Today you walk these intertwined worlds, feeling how pepper shaped destinies, elevating some to princely heights and casting others into penury. You step into Menander's courtyard and immediately sense the use of pepper as status symbol. Large ceramic jars stamped with the guild's seal stand ready to be filled. Their labels promise the finest crop, certified by sealed lead tokens. In a side chamber, you see a ledger bound in deer hide, its pages inscribed in elegant Tamil script. Each entry records hundreds of mons, roughly 37 kilograms each, of pepper traded for gold coins minted under the Chera king's authority. A mainstream fact, by the 3rd century CE, spices, especially pepper, accounted for over half of Muziris's export revenue, funding temple endowments and royal militias. You lift the lid of a small chest and find strings of gold coins so thick they rattle like potshots in your palm. Yet wealth here is volatile. You move to the eastern wing, where sacks of pepper lie under gauze to dry in sea breezes. The steward warns you, a damp season could have their value overnight. Obscure local lore tells of a peasant named Cannon who, in a single monsoon downpour, lost every vine he owned. He returned to Muziris as a beggar, his pockets as empty as the crates that once brimmed with peppercorns. Stories say he tried to pawn his daughter's jewelry for a single sack to reclaim a small plot of land but found the price gouged. Corners of the bazaar thrive on the desperation of the fallen. It's a bleak reminder that in Muziris, prosperity and poverty sleep side by side beneath the same pepper trees. You wander into the family prayer hall, where ivory statuettes of Lakshmi and Shiva stand beside carved blackwood chests. Oil lamps flicker in brass sconces, the saffron flame dancing across walls in frenzied patterns. Menander's father kneels before a silver lingam, sprinkling a few peppercorns in blessing. He murmurs a vow to donate 2 mons to the temple foundation if the next exports exceed last season's, an example of pepper-fueled piety that fortified both faith and social standing. Academics debate whether such donations were acts of genuine devotion or calculated displays of wealth meant to secure political alliances. In either case, it's clear that pepper trades intertwined with authority, allowing merchants to influence temple affairs and even succession disputes. Leaving the prince's mansion, you pass through narrow alleyways where the stench of rotting vines lingers. Here, paupers huddle around smoking hearths, rationing rice and stirring thin curry in clay bowls. You approach an elderly man named Thomas, once a prosperous pepper planter who mortgaged his land to buy better vines. A late frost 2 seasons back killed off most of his crop, and now he ekes out an existence by carrying empty jute sacks for other traders. He shows you a worn talisman, a peppercorn strung on a thread, meant to ward off misfortune. He murmurs that local shamans still use pepper as an anti-evil charm, though mainstream sources rarely note such folk practices. As he speaks, you feel the contrast sharpen. Within a few streets, fortunes rise and fall on the whims of weather, trade routes, and the merchant's fickle demands. Continuing onward, you come to a small shrine dedicated to the goddess Mariamman, protector against disease and crop blight. Villagers offer pepper-studded garlands and turmeric paste, hoping to avert famines that often follow poor harvests. Historians still debate the extent to which such cults were integral to agrarian societies or later additions designed to help communities cope with spice-driven boom-bust cycles. You place a peppercorn at the shrine's base, whispering a hope for Cannon and Toma, and feel a stirring of compassion mingle with the spice-scented air. Walking back toward the waterfront, you reach the pepper exchange, a circular pavilion roofed in copper plates that gleam like molten metal. Inside, trade is methodical. Brokers weigh pepper on polished scales and record sales on palm leaves. Menander's cousin, a young broker named Irvin Dunn, beckons you closer as he settles a high-stakes deal. A visiting Greek merchant offers a parcel of denarii for a guaranteed quality grade. Yet Irvin Dunn counters with strict grading procedures. Size, color, aroma. He shows you the secret test. 1 crushed peppercorn, mixed with water and grounded in a mortar, should release a creamy emulsion called the pepper milk. If it fails, if the mixture remains watery, the batch is rejected. It's an obscure quality control method few outsiders know, and it ensures Muziris maintains its reputation for excellence in distant markets. As dusk falls, the exchange teems with energy. Trays of gingerbread yellow turmeric are bartered alongside pepper consignments. But it's the black spheres that command every eye. You note the interplay of currencies. Roman coins, South Indian pitties, and even decorated cowrie shells still valued as small change. Large transactions, however, rely on bills of exchange inscribed on cloth, negotiated between guild members. Scholars debate how formalized these instruments were, whether they functioned like proto-banknotes or informal IOUs backed by personal trust. Regardless, you sense the sophistication of Muziris's financial networks, rivaling those of Alexandria or Antioch. At the market's edge, 2 factions of the Pepper Guild clash over shipping schedules. One group insists on sending a full fleet at once to maximize bulk discounts from Arab carriers. The other favors staggered departures to hedge against storm losses. Their arguments grow heated, echoing thunder from earlier monsoons. You slip away toward a quieter canal, where a brood of children play with dried peppercorns as makeshift toys, rolling them across muddy stones and chasing each other in games shaped by poverty. One child, a boy named Ravi, offers you a handful of pepper as a gift. His smile is bright, but his eyes reveal hunger. You accept 2 seeds, remembering both the dizzying heights of pepper princes and the depths of pauper's plight. Night settles with the hush of lanterns lit along the quay. You find Menander overseeing the loading of pepper onto 3 waiting vessels bound for distant ports, one to Alexandria, another to Rome, a third destined for the Persian Gulf. Each ship's manifest lists pepper first, followed by smaller quantities of cardamom, cinnamon, and frankincense. You watch as crates labeled Pepper Prince are hoisted aboard, their bright colors promising top-tier cargo. Yet beneath each crate lies a shadow. If one vessel sinks, an entire season's profit could vanish beneath the waves. The stakes feel immense, making you wonder how much fortune a single family can wield before nature or fate reclaims it all. Before you depart the quays, you pause at a small shrine where a shrimp-shaped gong hangs from a carved beam. Merchants strike it once to mark the passing of a day's profits or losses. You lift the wooden mallet, feeling the texture worn smooth by generations of traders. You strike the gong, its hollow echo resonating across silent warehouses. The note hangs in the air, a reminder that in Muziris, wealth and ruin share the same melody. Walking away, you glance back at the ships tethered under lantern glow. Their sunlight filters through the fractured leaves of a banyan tree into a quiet courtyard where a modest synagogue stands, its whitewashed walls mottled with age. Moss creeps over a carved stone entrance bearing Hebrew letters, and as you step inside, the air carries a faint trace of spice from nearby warehouses. Flickering oil lamps rest on low benches, their shadows dancing across a patchwork of ceramic tiles. Historical accounts record a Jewish settlement on the Malabar Coast by the 1st century CE, when traders from the Levant first anchored at Muziris' shores. Mainstream scholarship holds that by the 3rd century, this community had established formal places of worship, making it one of India's oldest Jewish congregations. Yet the precise location of the earliest synagogues remains contested. Some archaeologists argue the ruins at Pattenham point to a synagogue foundation, while others insist the true site lies closer to present-day Kochi. Historians are still debating this question, whether the coastal settlement's primary sanctuary was here in Muziris or in a neighboring port town. Beneath your fingertips, the Hebrew inscriptions feel softly eroded, a testament to centuries of coastal humidity and shifting sands. A carved niche displays a small copper plate engraved with Tamil and Hebrew script, an example of Judeo-Malayalam where local language is written in Hebrew characters, a quirky linguistic fusion unseen in most textbooks. You trace the letters, imagining the merchants who once read their morning prayers here, their voices mingling with the clang of amphory and the low chant of temple bells across the inlet. A narrow lane leads you next to a humble church of the St. Thomas Christians, its facade marked by a simple cross above wooden doors. Inside, benches carved from jackfruit would encircle a central altar, where a brass gospel book rests on an embroidered cloth. Early tradition holds that St. Thomas the Apostle arrived on these shores in AD 52, planting one of Christianity's first seeds in India, an assertion celebrated in church lore but scrutinized by many modern scholars. Mainstream historians accept a Christian presence by the 4th century, supported by references in the Acts of Thomas and by Syriac inscriptions found at inland sites. Yet academic debate continues over the apostles' actual footprint. Was there a direct missionary voyage in the 1st century, or did Christianity spread here later via Persian merchants? As you light a beeswax candle, its wick infused with local camphor, you inhale a fragrance that blends Eastern liturgy and Malabar spice. A small plaque displays an inscription in Syriac script carved into polished granite. In the year of our Lord 345 AD, this place was blessed, though some scholars argue the date refers to later renovations, not the church's founding. Quiet hymns drift through open windows, echoing off walls painted in pastel hues, and you feel the weight of history balanced against the soft chirr of courtyard birds. Beyond the church, a cluster of temples rises amid swaying coconut palms. Brightly painted columns support intricate carvings of Shiva, Parvati, and local guardian deities such as Muniswaran, the protector of travelers. A carved naga, a serpent, winds around a granite pillar, its head crowned with pepper pods offered by merchants seeking divine protection. Mainstream evidence shows that coastal communities worshipped marine and fertility gods alongside Vedic deities, creating a layered spiritual landscape by the 2nd century CE. Yet scholars still debate this question, whether the coastal temples originated in ancient Dravidian folk traditions or were formalized later under Vedic influence. You crouch near a small shrine dedicated to Bhagavathi, the mother goddess, and sprinkle saffron-dyed rice and black peppercorns at her feet. Obscure local custom holds that offering pepper pods at this shrine ensures bountiful harvests upriver, a practice mentioned only in passing by temple records and otherwise preserved in oral lore. Incense smoke curls around stone steps stained red with turmeric paste, and you sense the convergence of trade, faith, and daily life in this sacred enclave. A week later, during the Feast of Onam, the entire port brims with color as Hindu, Jewish, and Christian residents celebrate harvest home in their own ways. You join a procession weaving through narrow streets. Women in batik saris carry rice offered to Vamana, men in white mundu shoulder brass pots of banana leaf-wrapped payasam, while Jewish families prepare sweet rice flavored with cinnamon and cardamom for a special singed lime Purim tradition they've adopted from local neighbors. Onam, though a Hindu festival, has become a shared occasion. Shops hang floral designs from coconut fronds, and Christians bring baskets of jackfruit to temple courtyards, invoking community harmony. Obscure as it sounds, some Jewish traders host Purim feasts using pepper-scented wine, a blending of traditions that appears nowhere in official liturgies, but survives in whispered accounts of older families. Historians are still debating this question, whether such interfaith celebrations indicate genuine cultural fusion or represent later adaptations to foster trade alliances. As you sample sweet jaggery slices and sip a spiced toddy, laughter and the thrum of drumbeats fill the air, and you feel this melting pot pulse at its liveliest. Winding through narrow alleyways, you glimpse merchant households where faiths interlace in daily life. In one courtyard, a Hindu spice merchant plants a small palm in front of a bronze menorah-shaped lampstand, an unexpected nod to his Jewish neighbors. Next door, a St. Thomas family displays a bronze peacock motif carved above their door, a symbol of Tamil identity, alongside a liturgical cross. Mainstream inscriptions at Patnam reveal Tamil and Syriac names inscribed side by side on burial slabs, a clear sign of cohabitation by the 5th century CE. Yet the extent of intermarriage between communities remains disputed. Some scholars argue religious law forbade such unions, while others point to unusual tombstones bearing both Jewish and Hindu iconography. You peer into a small shrine shared by two merchant families, one Hindu, one Christian, where offerings of fresh flowers, frankincense, and small clay figurines coexist. An obscure record tells of a Christian bride wearing a peppercorn necklace at her wedding, symbolizing both fertility and prosperity, a custom mentioned only in a single temple ledger. You sense the delicate balance these families maintain, blending loyalty to faith with the pragmatism of trade in a cosmopolitan port. Throughout the bazaar, Tamil reigns as the lingua franca, but it's frequently laced with Arabic, Greek, and even Aramaic phrases. You overhear a Jewish broker calling out "meth ori razana," quick deal, in a hybrid tongue, then switch to pure Malayalam to haggle with a temple priest. Merchants speak of kapal vipakam, ship schedule, using a mix of Sanskrit-derived terms and Persian loanwords. Mainstream studies confirm that by the early centuries CE, Muziris thrived on a polyglot market, with Tamil serving as the backbone of communication. However, scholars still debate whether this constituted a true Creole language with its own grammar, or simply a patchwork of code words used for swift bargaining. An obscure note, certain trading families maintain secret bazaar ciphers, substituting pepper for money and ginger for news, to keep rival merchants guessing. As you twist a string of black pepper around your finger, you marvel at how language itself can become a traded commodity. Morning rituals reveal another layer of unity and diversity. Incense for temple rites, frankincense for church prayers, and myrtle branches dipped in wine for synagogue blessings. You watch as priests of every faith select spices from the same communal alcove, cardamom pods, cinnamon quills, saffron threads, each drawn according to ceremony. Mainstream liturgical texts acknowledge local spice offerings but rarely mention the coastal port's shared dispensary, while some scholars argue that early Christians here adapted Jewish spicebox customs for their paschal liturgies. Obscure evidence from a fragmentary copper scroll hints that priests once recorded spice inventories jointly, splitting costs among temple, church, and synagogue treasuries. Historians are still debating this question. Did the three faiths maintain strictly separate ritual silos, or was there practical pooling of resources in Muziris's tight-knit community? Architecturally, religious buildings cluster along the water's edge, their roofs forming a jagged skyline against the lagoon. A Byzantine mosaic floor, its tesserae now scattered, lies half-hidden beneath temple rubble, suggesting contact with Eastern Roman craftsmen. Mainstream archaeologists have found traces of Greek-style columns and Corinthian capitals in what may have been a 3rd-century Christian basilica, while others see those fragments as evidence of a wealthy Hindu patron importing foreign artisans. The academic debate rages on. Was there a dedicated church building with mosaic flooring here, or were these fragments reused temple materials? You pick up a chipped tile and turn it over, noting the faint remnants of gold leaf, an opulent hint of cross-cultural ambition. Even amid occasional disputes over dock fees, water access, or festival dates, the communities developed mechanisms for cooperation. A council of elders, composed of temple chiefs, synagogue rabbis, and church deacons, convened monthly under a grand beneath the knotted canopy of mangrove roots. Shadows flicker like restless spirits over brackish water. Paddling a slender canoe, oars dipping through tangled prop roots, you slip into a world where myths take root in living wood. Here, in the labyrinth of Muziris's drowned forests, every whisper of wind and creak of wood carries a tale older than any stone temple. This is Myths in the Mangroves, where the swamp's silent pulse reveals legends buried beneath centuries of silt. Mud squelches under your sandals as you step onto a narrow mud bank, where the tide crests only at high water. Ancient mariners recognized mangroves as natural breakwaters, their dense roots absorbing the monsoon's fury and protecting vessels moored inland. A lifeline for Muziris's harbors that dates back to at least the 1st century CE. Each root is slick with algae and dotted with barnacles. A tiny fiddler crab scuttles across a peeling root, its one massive claw waving as though in greeting. The air tastes of salt and decay, a bittersweet tang that lingers on your tongue. Following a whispered legend, you push past a tangle of aerial roots into a hidden lagoon. Moonlight filters through leafy gaps, painting the water silver. Fishermen speak of the Veiled Queen, a phantom goddess said to rise from the mud on new moon nights to rebury stolen temple treasures beneath the mangroves. According to local lore, she appears cloaked in wet jasmine garlands, her voice a rustle of dry leaves. Obscure as it sounds, some villagers swear that on the darkest nights, they've glimpsed her reflection in the water. A pale face framed by dripping hair, eyes as deep and green as the forest itself. You remember a mainstream account. Colonial-era botanists recorded mangrove ecosystems here as early as the 19th century, noting their crucial role in preserving shoreline stability and nurturing fish nurseries. Their journals mention coral-encrusted pottery shards beneath root mats and bone fragments from long-sunken ships, suggesting that even shipwrecks became part of the mangrove's living tapestry. You sink your hand into the mud and pull up a chipped amphor neck, its Roman maker's mark faint but legible beneath a layer of oyster shell. It's a tangible link to ancient commerce and catastrophe. Drifting deeper, you hear chanting low, rhythmic hums that echo across the water. A cluster of fishermen stands around a half-submerged shrine, a carved granite lingam encrusted with barnacles, its surface smoothed by centuries of tidal wash. They've tied bright orange marigold garlands to the lingam's neck and lit oil lamps in floating leaf boats, their flames dancing on the water like fallen stars. They explain that this is the shrine of Nagaraja, the serpent king who rules beneath the mud, offering spices, peppercorns, turmeric, cardamom. They seek his blessing before casting nets. Ancient texts attest that Naga worship was part of Kerala's coastal culture by the 3rd century CE, when merchants invoked serpent deities for safe passage through storm-lashed waters. Joining the circle, you cast 2 peppercorns onto the lingam and whisper a prayer for calm seas. A fisherman tells you that if the offerings disappear overnight, the Naga has accepted them. If they remain, it's a sign he's displeased. You peer at the floating lamps, their flicker refracted in swirling eddies. Salt water licks the shrine's base, and you wonder whether this ritual began as a formal temple ceremony or as a private plea by single families. Historians are still debating this question, whether the mangrove Naga shrines emerged from Vedic serpent worship or evolved independently among Dravidian fisherfolk. Leaving the shrine, you follow a narrow water channel flanked by towering gray mangroves. The air grows thick with humidity, and hidden insects chirp like distant bells. Beneath the water's surface, you spot a fragment of a Roman coin, a denarius, glinting in the gloom. Obscure rumor holds that coins were tossed into the mangroves as payment to Nagas, a submerged toll to appease spirits guarding sunken treasures. Some archaeologists argue these coins represent lost commerce. Others think they're deliberate offerings, sealing deals made in whispered ceremonies. The debate continues among sedimentologists and historians alike. A sudden rustle in the overhead canopy sends a pair of green pigeons fluttering away. You steady your lantern's glow on tangled roots, revealing a narrow earthen platform overgrown with ferns. Here lies the site of a submerged temple, once dedicated to a local deity whose name is lost. Only a dozen stone pillars remain, their tops coated in algae and moss. Colonial explorers from the 1800s sketched these pillars, noting marine barnacles at their bases, proof that the sea had risen to swallow the shrine centuries earlier. Modern surveys suggest these pillars align with the position of an inland road visible only through aerial photography. Yet some scholars contest whether the pillars mark a temple at all or are merely remnants of a warehouse's support columns. The argument endures in dusty library rooms and conference halls. Stepping between the pillared ghosts, you find carved reliefs on a fallen lintel, lotus motifs entwined with cobra figures, and an inscription in early Tamil Brahmi script. You quarry a scrap of pottery to use as a brush and gently clear mud from the inscription. The text mentions Varuna's blessings, a reference to a Vedic sea god. On this spot, it's one of the rare interweavings of Northern Vedic and Southern Dravidian religious imagery, suggesting a fusion of beliefs that scholars still dispute. Historians are still debating this question, whether Vedic practices spread here through political patronage or through mercantile networks importing priestly traditions. A low rumble rolls through the mangrove floor, and you realize a tide shift has begun. Water seeps into the temple chamber, swirling around your ankles as you steady the lintel. You glimpse a sliver of sunlight marking the far end of the corridor formed by roots overhead, nature's own cathedral. Shadows twist and dance, morphing stone figures into fearful demons and dancing gods. A local elder once told you that on nights of the lunar eclipse, these shadows animate, enacting tales of gods battling asuras beneath the water. Few written sources mention these eclipse rituals, leaving them shrouded in the mist of folklore. Wading through rising water, you emerge into a wider basin where trophy boards of ancient fishermen hang from mangrove trunks. Weathered wooden planks display rows of cowrie shells, coral fragments, and carved ivory tusks, proof of catches and offerings made in honor of sea gods. An inscription on one plank reads, "Gale of 312 CE spared our nets. Blessed be the Naga Queen." The date, converted from a local lunar calendar, is debated by epigraphers. Some argue the conversion is off by decades, while others defend its accuracy based on cross-referencing temple records. The planks creak in the current, and you run a hand along chipped alphabets, feeling the pulse of every season's hope and threat. Beyond the trophy basin, a deep channel leads you to a grove where a colossal crocodile idol stands, half-submerged and carved from a single block of granite. According to fishermen's ballads, this idol represents Bhupendra, a legendary king who turned himself into a crocodile to rule the waterways. Some say he still waits here, guarding lost vessels. An obscure talebearer once claimed to have glimpsed the idol's eyes moving, though most dismiss it as a hallucination induced by moonlit reflections. Mainstream antiquaries rarely record this crocodile worship, but a few travelers' diaries from the 17th century note a yearly festival where locals feed rice to the idol, asking for bountiful catches. Today, you toss a pinch of rice into the murky water and watch tiny fish dart in to feed, as though obeying an ancient decree. A distant drumbeat drifts through the mangroves, and you recognize the rhythm of the Mangrove Festival, held once every 5 years at a hidden clearing where deities are believed to convene. Fishermen say the festival predates written history, a time when sea spirits and forest gods met in council under the stars. In preparation, villagers carve new idols from driftwood, serpents, crocodiles, and half-human figures, and launch them on rafts into the channel. If an idol sinks on the third night, it's a sign of divine approval. If it drifts free, the assembly must reconvene next year. Scholars debate whether this festival is a survival of Indus Valley serpent rites transmitted through time or a unique coastal innovation. Historians are still debating this question, whether the Mangrove Festival reflects ancient pan-Indian rituals or is a localized practice born of Muziris's maritime culture. Following the drum's echo, you push past a thicket of mangrove apple trees bearing small, sour fruits. Their branches arch low, and their tangled roots form a canopy high above, creating an otherworldly cathedral. At the heart of this grove stands a moon well, a circular pool lined with basalt stones. Fishermen say that on full moon nights, the pool glows faintly blue, as if lit by moonbeams trapped beneath the water. Obscure local reports mention that those who drink from the well on a full moon gain the ability to understand animal speech, though no academic work confirms these claims. You peer into the pool, its surface mirror-smooth save for scattered petals, and catch the pale reflection of the moon rising. Morning light stretches across the excavation grid, illuminating numbered stakes and the fine dust that drifts like pollen from each freshly turned trench. A low hum of voices rises as scholars gather their tools, trowels glinting at the edges, paintbrushes of varying widths, and stainless steel calipers poised to measure every shard. The air smells of wet earth and strong coffee carried in thermoses, binding this modern camp to ancient routines of curiosity and discovery. With careful steps, you navigate between trenches 3 and 7, where stratigraphic layers reveal shifting tides of occupation and abandonment. In Trench 3, a section of burnt hearth shows charcoal flecked with tiny, charred inclusions, peppercorns preserved by accident in the fire's heat. That direct link between ancient culinary practice and modern laboratory analysis underlines a mainstream point. Black pepper was not merely a traded commodity, but woven into local diets and rituals by at least the 1st century CE. The aroma of crushed charcoal still clings to the coarse sand around the fireplace, as if the moment of that long-extinguished flame lingers in the soil. Epigraphists bend over a limestone block from Trench 5, its faint Tamil Brahmi engraving almost obscured by a film of mud. Deciphering the inscription demands more than a keen eye. You assist by gently spraying distilled water to soften encrusted silt, revealing letterforms that could read as a guild member's name or a temple dedication. Scholars argue. Indeed, historians are still debating whether this script belongs to the port's heyday around 100 CE or was carved centuries later by inland settlers fleeing coastal erosion. Every swirl of the chisel mark could shift that timeline, and as you peer through a magnifying lens, the tension of that uncertainty hums through the camp. Beyond the trenches, geoarchaeologists conduct low-impact seismic surveys in adjacent marshland. You watch as they place geophones amid mangrove seedlings and bang a portable hammer against a steel plate. The resulting seismic waves reveal subsurface anomalies, linear shadows consistent with buried jetties and collapsed warehouses. Obscure though it sounds, this microgravity mapping has detected subtle density variations, hinting at wooden piles preserved beneath anaerobic mud. Few maritime digs in South Asia employ such precision techniques, but here they promise to pinpoint docks lost to centuries of longshore drift. Over by the water channel, the underwater team works in hip waders, hose in hand, preparing a suction dredge to clear silt from submerged sections of trench. A colleague jokes that it feels more like submarine archaeology than a beach holiday, but the mood is far from frivolous. As you help guide the hose, fine sediments swirl away to reveal a coil of ancient coir rope lying intact on a coral-encrusted beam. Textual sources praise Malabar Coast's elasticity, an essential feature that allowed wooden hulls to flex under monsoon strains. But touching that rope connects theory to tactile evidence in a way no book ever could. Back on dry land, the lab tent buzzes with activity as artifacts undergo initial conservation. Sieves bristle with coarse mesh, used to catch bone fragments, shell beads, and charcoal flecks as soil washes through. You crouch beside a graduate student examining residues from flotation samples. Tiny plant fibers and charred spice seeds floating atop the water. Among them, unmistakable fragments of cardamom sheaths, and a few scorched ginger root bits testify to ancient culinary complexity. It's an obscure microarchaeological insight that reveals much about foodways. Residue studies rarely make headlines but illuminate daily life in vibrant detail. Radiocarbon specialists gather around a sample of those charcoal seeds sealed in glass vials. The preliminary date range places them between 50 BCE and 100 CE, reinforcing the idea that Muziris' trade network boomed well before some traditional chronologies allow. Yet calibration curves permit error margins spanning a century, and you watch as arguments tumble between teams. Was Muziris' zenith under early Chera patronage, or did Roman demand elevate it later? Historians are still debating this precise chronology, and every calibrated reading feels like a roll of the dice in a high-stakes scholarly game. When afternoon sun breaks through clouds, a drone takes flight above the site, its LiDAR scanner sweeping the landscape. Point clouds materialize into 3D models on a laptop. Buried canals, rectilinear platforms, and possible roadways stretching toward the distant hills. You marvel at how ancient city blocks, lost beneath paddy fields and thorny scrub, emerge in digital relief. Yet remote sensing requires ground truth verification, and you accompany a team to test LiDAR-identified anomalies, poking trowels into soft earth to confirm or refute the scanner's promise. Parallel to LiDAR, photogrammetry experts line up overlapping photographs of a collapsed wall segment coated in lime plaster. Software stitches the hundreds of images into a seamless panorama, revealing tool marks, layer thickness, and even subtle pigment traces. Mustard yellow turmeric mixed into plaster to repel pests, a quirky detail few classical accounts mention. The 3D model becomes a virtual canvas for studying construction techniques, but as with every digital method, scholars caution that lighting and camera angle can deceive. Historians are still debating how much emphasis to place on these virtual reconstructions. You overhear, and indeed the balance between tech and trowel remains a live issue. Midday chatter turns to the periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a single contemporary merchant guide that extols Muziris's pepper wealth. Debate swirls. Was the periplus intended as a practical navigation manual, or a promotional pamphlet for Roman investors? You sip sweet tea spiced with ginger and lemongrass, pondering this question as you sketch coordinates in your notebook. Inscribed place names like Muziris and Baragaza align roughly with modern coastlines. Yet some scholars argue these represent clusters of harbors rather than one port. Every coordinate line on your map feels simultaneously precise and tantalizingly vague. At the site office, a visiting scholar spreads facsimiles of Cholera palm leaf grants alongside periplus excerpts. The Chola texts name a port, Muziris, phonetically similar to Muziris, raising questions of continuity. Did Roman-era Muziris morph into medieval Muziris, or are they distinct settlements along shifting rivers? It's an academic puzzle that historians are still debating, and you find yourself drawn into the controversy, cross-checking place names, river courses, and temple records in pursuit of resolution. Late afternoon light glints off a Roman amphora fragment stamped Agripp, a maker's mark pointing to the era of Agrippa in the late 1st century BCE. You cradle the shard in a gloved hand, imagining olive oil sloshing within and heartrending voyages across the Mediterranean. That mainstream connection to Mediterranean commerce is vivid, yet an obscure analysis of residue traces inside a parallel amphora revealed hints of local spices, buried beneath oil to preserve aromas, suggesting that merchants sometimes packed mixed cargo to maximize profits. Excavation diaries seldom dwell on such oddball details, but here they spark spirited discussion. Nearby, a student excitedly displays a small pile of bronze scale weights inscribed in Greek numerals. Each weight bears marks of wear, as though passed hand to hand in bustling bazaars. Complementing these standardized tens, local terracotta weights molded in a fish-shape speak to indigenous systems of measurement. The coexistence of Greek and native units underscores Muziris's hybrid economy. Yet epigraphers dispute whether the fish-shaped weights remained in parallel use or gradually gave way to Greek standards under Roman influence. Historians are still debating how fast coinage and weights replaced barter. Someone notes, echoing the ongoing tension between local tradition and global commerce. Across the site, conservators immerse delicate seashell beads from a 4th century burial in freshwater baths to leach out corrosive salts. Etched crosses peer from their pale centers, evidence of early Christian practice on the coast. Some scholars argue that these beads predate supposed Nestorian arrivals, suggesting a direct apostolic origin. Others insist later Persian missionaries introduced Christianity here. As you rinse the beads, the debate feels both academic and deeply personal, touching on identity, faith, and the power of symbols to traverse oceans. Toward evening, ceramicists sort amphora shards by fabric, glaze, and rim thickness. Red slip ware from the Aegean sits in one bin, rough local wares in another. A graduate student passes you a thin-lipped glazed bowl stamped with lotus motifs, likely a luxury import repurposed as a ritual vessel in local temples. Obscure seriation studies suggest these bowls circulated freely between religious and domestic contexts, but mainstream typologies seldom distinguish such cross-cultural reuses. Handling the brittle rim, you wonder how many hands, Greek, Jewish, Hindu, once held it in blessing or banquet. Evening gathers scholars beneath a canopy of fluorescent bulbs as the site director reviews the day's data on a large whiteboard. Radiocarbon results, seismic profiles, photogrammetry slices, and epigraphic transcriptions converge in a complex mosaic. Everyone mists cling to the hollows of ancient trails winding inland from the ruined quay, their damp fingers curling around the moss-covered stones marking old waypoints. Dawn's pale light reveals a narrow earthen path leading away from the lagoon, its edges blurred by undergrowth and fallen palm fronds. Following this hidden ribbon of soil, you trace the arteries that once connected Muziris' salt-worn port to the mist-shrouded spice groves of the Western Ghats. Stepping over a fallen teak beam that once served as a makeshift bridge, the path climbs steadily into dense forest. Young jackfruit saplings crowd the sides, their leathery leaves dripping dew. Beneath the canopy, shafts of sunlight flicker across a carpet of decaying leaves, each footfall releasing the spicy tang of nutmeg husk and turmeric root hidden in the soil. Local farmers still call this route the Pepper Pilgrim's Way, for it was trodden by caravan drivers hauling sacks of peppercorns uphill toward interior markets. By the 2nd century CE, pack animals, bullocks and mules, plotted here in lines 100 strong, their bells tinkling in cadence to forest sounds. That network of overland paths formed a mainstream spine of commerce, supplementing the coastal jetties that fed ships bound for Alexandria and Rome. Every 100 paces, you find a weather-worn milestone carved from granite. A simple pillar inscribed with a lotus motif and the word Muziris in early Tamil Brahmi script. These waymarkers are rare survivors. Most have toppled under root heave or been repurposed by later settlers. Yet scholars have identified at least 5 such markers along this ridge, suggesting a formalized route maintained by the Chera kingdom. Historians are still debating this question, whether these milestones reflect centralized state sponsorship of inland trade or were erected by wealthy merchants' guilds to ease navigation. Regardless, the existence of these stones attests to a sophisticated understanding of overland logistics rarely attributed to ancient South Asian polities. About midday, you reach a mossy stone stair hewn into the hillside, its treads worn smooth by generations of sandal and barefoot alike. At its base stands a modest shrine to Vana Durga, the forest goddess, adorned with peppercorn garlands and turmeric paste. Local legend holds that wandering spice merchants paid homage here before embarking on the steepest sections of the trail, seeking divine favor to ward off bandits and wild elephants. An obscure detail: some villagers claim devotees once offered live geckos before the shrine, believing the reptiles' chirps summoned protective spirits. Though mainstream epigraphic sources make no mention of such rites, oral traditions preserve this curious ritual in hushed awe. Climbing further, the trail broadens into a grassy terrace overlooking a slapdash settlement of stone huts. Elderly villagers squat around cooking fires, stirring pots of rice seasoned with cardamom and clove. They greet you warmly, eyes bright beneath weathered brows. One woman named Punguzal shares fresh jasmine tea and invites you to inspect ancient rock carvings behind her home. There, a deep-set panel depicts camelback traders alongside local figures bearing woven baskets of ginger and cinnamon. The carving style suggests a mingling of Persian artistic influence, a testament to routes reaching beyond Arabia into the interiors of Mesopotamia. Archaeologists have long cited this panel as proof of direct Indo-Persian contacts, though some argue its weathering indicates a much later addition, possibly from medieval trade networks, rather than ancient spice caravans. Refreshed, you push on into a grove of towering bamboo and wild pepper vines that coil skyward like living ladders. Here the path becomes almost invisible, marked only by bundles of dried palm fronds placed at crotches of trees. Those fronds served as rudimentary signposts for caravans, their mottled yellow blades standing out in the green gloom. An obscure snippet from a 12th century temple chronicle mentions leaf arrows pointing to mountain passes, implying this practice endured well after Muziris' decline. Scholars debate whether those leaf arrows were remnants of coastal traders' lore or innovations by hill tribe guides who adapted the route for pilgrims bound for inland shrines. Emerging onto a rocky escarpment, you stare down a sheer drop into a valley where tea terraces ripple across the slopes. A narrow switchback traces the opposite wall, linking the spice route footpath to jagged peaks crowned with mist. In the valley below, cow-dung fires burn on stone plinths beside cairns of river-smooth boulders, markers for travelers descending toward the Periyar River. Merchant diaries recovered at Patnam describe these cairns as stone sentinels, guiding heavily laden caravans through monsoon torrents. The diaries note that by the 3rd century CE, traders timed their descents to seasonal river swellings, coordinating river rafting of spices down to coastal jetties. That coordinated inland waterborne trade demonstrates a mainstream integration of path and river networks remarkable for its era. Mid-afternoon light splits the leaves in golden shafts as you cross a shallow stream where the water glints green from submerged moss. Here, a series of stone steps, each carved with a deep groove, serves as an indigenous grooved axle track for the wooden carts that once bore cinnamon quills down to riverbanks. This ingenious method provided guidance to ox-drawn carts, keeping them aligned in tight defile without metal rails. Few modern texts mention such local engineering, but field surveys have uncovered these grooves at several inland sites, hinting at a scattered network of terrain-specific transport innovations. Up ahead lies a ruined temple complex, its outer walls collapsed but inner sanctum surprisingly intact. You slip through a fallen gateway framed by intricately carved tamarind tree motifs, trees sacred to local hill deities. Inside, a series of low stone platforms supported wooden platforms that served as resting pavilions for weary traders. Archaeobotanical studies of pollen from the decayed would indicate that traders burned frankincense and myrrh here, imports from southern Arabia, creating intoxicating clouds that mingled with local incense blends. This fusion of foreign and indigenous ritual practice underscores a cultural blending along these footpaths as profound as that on the port's waterfront. Just beyond the pavilion, a moss-covered cistern collects freshwater from a spring emerging from a fissure in the rock. Traders carved this cistern to refill goatskins and water bags before the final ascent to the mountain passes. A rare copper spout still protrudes from one wall, stamped with a merchant guild emblem, 2 entwined palm fronds. Obscure though it may be, the spout's corrosion layers revealed trace elements of copper compounds used in Ayurvedic purifications, indicating that this water also served ritual baths for pilgrims en route. Few mainstream studies note the dual civic ritual function of such installations, leaving this detail to specialists in South Asian hydro-ritual archaeology. The final leg of the trail climbs through groves of wild cinnamon, the sweet, spicy aroma rising in waves. Here, slender trunks bear scars from past harvests where local communities slit bark to collect inner quills. An obscure tradition, harvesters once carved small Shiva lingams into these slits, believing the tree's sap would sanctify the spice. Mainstream temple inscriptions discount this as mere folklore, but in interviews with elders you learn these carvings persist to this day, their faded figures still visible beneath bands of golden bark. Before the trail crests the ridge, you arrive at a vantage point overlooking a circle of distant mountain temples, a chain of brick towers punctuating the horizon. Their silhouettes glow in the late light, each sanctum dedicated to deities of rain, fertility, and safe passage. Traders erected these hilltop temples as a pledge to return, dedicating small chapels to deities who governed the elements they had braved. A 5th century CE vellum fragment found in a nearby monastery references pilgrim trader vows to build windsong shrines on high ridges, though historians are still debating this question. Whether those shrines catered more to spiritual devotion or served as waypoints ensuring economic stability for spice exports. Descending the final, steep slope, you enter a grove of ancient teak where twisted roots form natural arches. Beneath one such arch lies an earthen pot wedged into a root knot, an old traveler's cache. Opened carefully, it contains a handful of brittle palm leaf manuscripts wrapped in oil-soaked cloth. These fragile documents, written in early Malayalam, list the names of mountaineers and muleteers employed by spice guilds, along with agreements on shares of cargo and protection fees paid to hill chiefs. Scholars treasure these manuscripts for their direct insight into caravan organization, but debate persists about their dating. Radiocarbon tests on the oilcloth yield a range from the 3rd to the 7th century CE, making precise chronology elusive. Beyond the teak grove, the path flattens into a broad ridge road bordered by stone curbs. moss-damp inscriptions carved into outcrops record who maintained the road. This causeway cleared by the Guild of Spice Merchants, under Chera patronage, on the full moon of Kenya month. Yet some epigraphists argue the use of regional calendar terms points to later medieval restoration rather than original construction. Historians are still debating this question. Whether the Chera kings directly financed these inland routes in fragrant breezes drift through modern Kerala's spice markets, carrying whispers of centuries-old voyages. Stalls heaped with glossy black peppercorns, pale cardamom pods, and cinnamon quills tumble into the street, their scents coalescing into a heady tapestry that envelopes all who pass. You find yourself inhaling deeply, letting the complex aroma, spicy, sweet, earthy, settle into your lungs like a warm embrace. Every inhale connects you to the same currents that once bore laden dhows to Muziris's docks, their sails swollen by the southwest monsoon. Along a sun-washed lane, women clad in cassava saris sort spices under the shade of coconut palms. They run their fingers through piles of coriander seed, crushing a few to release its citrusy undertones, then scatter them into brass bowls for drying. In ancient treatises, scholars noted that coriander was valued not only for flavor but also as a digestive aid, used regularly in temple feasts and royal banquets alike. Mainstream histories affirm that by the 3rd century CE, coriander, cumin, and fennel were integral to South Indian cuisines, complementing the fiery bite of black pepper. At a corner shop, a wizened merchant grinds turmeric rhizomes on a granite mortar, his rhythmic pestle strokes sending golden dust into the air. Turmeric, celebrated here as the golden root, still paints curries and cosmetics with vivid yellow. Few today recall that ancient Kerala weavers used turmeric-infused dye to create ceremonial cloths for temple festivals, an obscure technique that brightened garments without mordants or metallic salts. According to temple records from the 5th century, turmeric-dyed fabrics were offered to deities as part of harvest celebrations, a practice whose origin scholars are still debating in academic journals. Drifting on, you pass a roadside shrine where pepper vines twist around a carved granite lingam. Devotees tie garlands of dried pods around its base, whispering prayers for prosperity. In local lore, offering pepper here ensures the health of spice crops upriver, a tradition seldom mentioned in mainstream texts but preserved in the oral histories of spice farming communities. One elder tells you that during lean seasons, farmers would toss peppercorns into well water to invoke rain, believing the spice's fiery nature could stir clouds. Though scientists today view this as symbolic folk ritual, its persistence in remote villages speaks to the spice's deep cultural resonance. The roar of traffic fades behind you as you enter a narrow alley where home kitchens bustle. Copper pots bubble with simmering coconut milk and tamarind pulp, aromatic curry leaves crackling in sizzling oil. A chef ladles a dollop of grated ginger and chopped green chilies into steaming rice, then sprinkles freshly toasted mustard seeds. This staple seasoning, mustard heated until it pops, remains a defining feature of Kerala's daily meals. Scholars note that the use of mustard seed tempering likely spread here from eastern India via ancient trade networks, though historians are still debating this question. Whether those culinary exchanges flowed directly along coastal routes or took unintended detours through inland kingdoms. On a table outside, banana leaves unfold like emerald placemats for a full vegetarian sadhya. Rice piles gleam alongside banana chips, achars, pickles, and side dishes spiced with cardamom, cloves, and star anise. Each component reflects centuries of flavor layering. Kuta curry scented with cumin and coconut, erisserie enlivened with black pepper, and pulisserie tart with tamarind and fenugreek seed. Food historians agree that the sadhya's complexity is rooted in the interplay of local produce and imported spices. Yet debate lingers over whether the original sadhya resembled today's feast or incorporated more Mediterranean elements, garlic, wine, and herbs, before they were replaced with indigenous ingredients. Beyond the market limits, fisherfolk line the backwaters, their nets trailing fragrant musky water woven with saline breeze. Fresh catches, anchovies, shrimp, and pearl spot are sautéed with a paste of chili, garlic, and ginger, then finished with a spray of curry leaf-infused coconut oil. Modern chefs elevate this dish with a finishing sprinkle of cracked black pepper, recalling how ancient seafarers guaranteed the spice's freshness by storing it in lightweight vines woven into baskets. Obscure ethnographies mention that tidal pulses once carried pepper sent inland during fish auctions, prompting midday culinary improvisations among traders ashore. Crossing a narrow teak bridge, you smell the unmistakable aroma of cloves mingled with damp earth. Local growers hang weathered boughs of dried cloves to air in the morning sun, their pungent floral notes intensifying as humidity drops. Cloves were once so rare that merchants guarded them like precious gemstones, transporting them in sealed clay pots. Archaeobotanical digs at Pattenham have uncovered charred clove fragments alongside rice grains, confirming that by the 1st century, cloves formed a minor but significant cargo, a detail often overshadowed by pepper's prominence. In a modern spice processing plant, machines hum as workers sort, clean, and package spices for global shipment. Conveyor belts laden with green cardamom pods glide past quality control stations where pods are hand-checked for color and size. Cardamom's intoxicating aroma still fetches premium prices worldwide, just as it did when Romans prized it for perfuming amphitheaters. Obscure archive notes from the 4th century CE mention traders dubbing cardamom the Emerald of the East, though mainstream histories rarely cite that flourish beyond passing references. Outside, the coastal breeze carries whispers of past port's bustle. High tides stir woven crab baskets on mangrove-lined canals, hinting at the same waterways that once ferried merchants to Muziris's jetties. Environmental scientists confirm that many of these canals align with ancient channels recorded in 19th century surveys, though shifting channels and sediment have obscured precise outlines. Historians continue to debate how extensive Muziris's reach was inland, whether it was a single hub or a network of satellite ports. Local fishermen, however, maintain that they still cruise routes passed down through generations, guided by star charts whose origins mingle myth and reality. At sunset, you climb a gentle ridge overlooking pepper plantations that ripple like emerald waves. The vines climb teak poles in regimented rows, their berries clustered in plump strings. A breeze carries their scent for miles, a phenomenon biochemists explain as volatile organic compounds dispersing in humid air. Recent studies reveal that those same compounds, piperine and limonene, can drift kilometers from their source, detectable by modern sensors. Few agricultural historians mention this airborne legacy, but it underscores how spice odors once guided traders to distant markets by scent alone. Dusk drapes the plantations in violet shadows as temple bells toll. In a nearby temple courtyard, priests prepare lamps of sesame oil infused with galangal and camphor. The smoky fragrance drifts toward the sea, a living echo of ancient rituals that marked each dawn and dusk with offerings to deities of land and water. Mainstream Indologist studies acknowledge these rites but often overlook the continuous thread linking modern pujas to pre-Roman ceremonies. Scholars remain divided on whether the coastal temple's ritual lexicon was imported from northern Vedic centers or grew organically from Dravidian traditions, a question still under scholarly scrutiny. Night markets spring to life when lanterns awaken the stalls. Bright yellow turmeric pillows contrast with deep brown jaggery cakes, each offering at once sweet and spiced. Tea vendors brew toddies that blend ginger, black pepper, and small pinch of nutmeg, served in clay cups that warm your hands. This late-night beverage is said to calm the mind and impart sweet dreams, a practice traced back to Ayurvedic texts recommending spice-infused warm milk before sleep. Local herbalists still prescribe this tonic for insomnia, drawing on knowledge passed down through family lineages. A coastal villa's veranda offers views of moonlit waves and coconut palms swaying in rhythm. Inside, lantern light glows on shelves lined with antique spice jars from a collector's trove, some stamped with Roman makers' marks, others embossed with Persian inscriptions. These jars serve as silent chroniclers of trade's ebb and flow. Historians debate whether such collections represent colonial-era acquisitions or ancient heirlooms preserved by local elites. Undoubtedly, their presence testifies to how deeply spice commerce shaped Kerala's cultural landscape. In a quiet tea shop, you sip a blend of cinnamon and clove tea's flavor lingering like an old melody. Recipes vary by household, but most include a dash of black pepper to unlock essential oils, a domestic alchemy mirroring ancient distillation techniques used to extract spice essences. Obscure pharmacological manuscripts describe these blends as analgesics and digestive aids, predating modern medicine's embrace of active spice compounds. By midnight, the wind has settled into a gentle hum, carrying distant shells of temple horns and the soft patter of palm frond fans. Modern listeners might dismiss the sound as ambient noise, yet maritime anthropologists note its uncanny similarity to descriptions of ship. A drifting mist of memory clings to the ruins where once Muziris's bustling jetties met the Arabian Sea. You stand upon a stretch of sand now buried beneath centuries of shifting dunes and rising tides, listening to the final sigh of a vanished world. Broken coral blocks, half swallowed by mangrove roots, mark where ships once leaned against wooden spruce timbers. A faint breeze carries the salty whisper of waves, as though the sea itself mourns the port's disappearance. Stepping among low heaps of eroded sandstone, you notice the patterns of barnacles still clinging to submerged foundations, ghostly barnacle wreaths that bloom in tidal pools. Mainstream geological surveys confirm that coastal erosion accelerated after the Perrier flood of 1341 CE, redirecting river channels and dumping massive volumes of silt into the harbor mouth. Over subsequent centuries, the combination of longshore drift and sedimentation sealed Muziris beneath a shifting carpet of sand, leaving only faint contours detectable by ground-penetrating radar. Wandering inland, your foot catches on a flake of ceramic tile. Once glossy and green, now pitted and dull. Local fishermen have long recovered similar shards in their nets, unwittingly dragging fragments of the past from beneath the waves. Obscure as it sounds, legend holds that some nets still pull up coins stamped with Roman emperors' faces on fortunate mornings, reminding villagers of Muziris's global reach. Despite the Ortona flood's geological legacy, these chance finds weave small miracles into coastal folklore. Moving through tangled mangroves, the sense of loss deepens. Ornate stone columns, stripped of their capitals, lie scattered like ancient dominoes across mudflats. Each column once supported a roof of tiled terracotta under which goods were weighed and prayers were offered. Scholars are still debating whether these structures were part of grand warehouses commissioned by Cherokees or belonged to guild-funded trading houses, a question that hinges on interpreting fragmentary inscriptions half eroded by salt spray. The rising sun ignites drifting smoke from nearby hearths where villagers burn rice husks, their ash drifting over hidden ruins. They speak of elders who recall tales from grandparents about a city swallowed in a single season of storms and famine. One retold story speaks of a great wave that poured through the inlet, washing away entire districts of brick and wood. Mainstream historians acknowledge flood narratives in 14th-century chronicles, yet debate persists. Was a singular cataclysmic event the decisive blow, or did centuries of minor surges and gradual bank erosion quietly erase the port? Pressing on, the path climbs above an expanse of rice paddies that once formed backwaters of the inlet. Underneath soft mud, seismic surveys have traced linear depressions suggesting the former course of an inner channel lined with wooden palisades. Archaeologists uncovered a scattered line of iron nails, large enough to have fastened heavy timbers, that likely held bulkheads in place. Opaque records mention Chera engineers using a form of hydraulic sluice to clear silt, but whether these survived into medieval times remains contested. Many scholars lean toward a hypothesis of prolonged maintenance followed by eventual abandonment when costs outweighed benefits. Crossing a wooden footbridge that arches over a narrow stream, you glimpse the remnants of a stone causeway half drowned in vegetation. Contemporary travelers' accounts from Dutch mariners in the 17th century describe seeing a half-submerged walkway where locals still trod, believing it led to a hidden temple beneath the water. That anecdote appears only in a single captain's log, raising questions about its veracity. Historians are still debating whether Dutch explorers misidentified submerged ruins of a later settlement or were truly witnessing remnants of ancient Muziris. On a nearby hillock, a battered milestone stands, a granite pillar etched with a lotus seal and an inscription too faint to read clearly. This is the last in a chain of waymarkers that once guided traders inland to spice groves. Obscure tradition holds that passing pilgrims placed small coins in its base for safe passage. Neither temple records nor guild charters mention this practice, yet villagers swear by it, leaving modern travelers to wonder whether this custom reflects genuine antiquity or a later folk innovation grafted onto the pillar. Entering a grove of wild cinnamon trees, the ground is carpeted with curled quills, remnants of harvests taken long ago. A few trees still bear deep harvest cuts, each scar a testament to rhythms of trade and ritual. Ancient texts describe cinnamon as tribute paid to regional rulers, yet some scholars argue these references date to inland Chera courts rather than maritime Muziris. The grove's survival, though, speaks to a continuity of plant life even as ports vanish, and to a trade that endures far beyond the built environment. Further along, the mangrove channel widens into a shallow lagoon where a few rusted metal hoops poke from the mud, remains of barrels used to transport olive oil and wine. Maritime archaeologists have mapped dozens of such barrel fragments here, each spaced at intervals suggesting rows of stored amphorae once stacked on wooden racks. Mainstream interpretations treat them as evidence of organized storage yards. Yet a minority view posits that they represent barriers against pirate raids, forming booby-trapped perimeters whose placement is still challenged by new sonar data. The breeze shifts to carry faint tolling of a distant temple bell, drawing you toward a small shrine of undated construction. Its rough-hewn lingam is encrusted with barnacles at the base, the upper shaft polished by generations of worshippers. Locals say temple priests maintained rituals here for centuries after the port's decline, offering spices salvaged from mud, pepper, turmeric, cardamom, as tokens of remembrance. Though mainstream epigraphers seldom acknowledge the shrine's later history, oral histories preserve its function as a memory-keeping site long after commerce ceased. A broad expanse of alluvial plain lies just beyond the shrine, interlaced with faint levee walls now overgrown. Early 20th century surveyors documented field canals visible only in aerial photographs, noting their curious straightness amid natural wetlands. Geomorphologists attribute these to medieval land reclamation, but the original builders remain anonymous. No surviving record credits the Guzer clan or other local dynasts, leaving the levee's origins as uncertain as the lost port whose silt they intercepted. Circling back toward the shoreline, a lone fisherman in a small canoe paddles over patches of submerged masonry. He lifts a ceramic shard from a shallow reef, its glaze crackled by salt and time, and hands it to you. The glaze bears traces of green copper pigment, a hallmark of early medieval Islamic ceramics. Obscure underwater salvage records suggest that coins and ceramics continued to drift through these waters well into the 15th century, hinting at a trickle of commerce persisting despite Muziris's formal disappearance. As afternoon light wanes, you reach a low bluff overlooking scenes of modern industry. Cargo ships lumber past the silhouette of a cement plant built on reclaimed land, its smokestacks towering above salt pans. In the distance, a highway bridges reclaimed real estate, the clutch of tanker trucks carrying paper spices to distant markets. The transformation from ancient port to industrial corridor underscores the relentless march of time. Where once commodities moved in wind-driven sails, now engines hum, yet the same sequence of spices still shapes livelihoods. Pausing at the bluff's edge, you study a rough sketch of old Muziris overlaid on an archaeological site map. It shows jetties, warehouses, shrine clusters, and merchant quarters, all now crosshatched with reconstruction zones and irrigation channels. Scholars remain divided over whether the Patinum site corresponds precisely to the port described in the Periplus, or whether it represents one of several smaller harbors collectively called Muziris. Excavation director Madhavan Krishna argues for a single site model. Rival researcher Leela Nair insists on a multi-harbor hypothesis. Historians are still debating this question, and every new find adds complexity. Sunset burns the sky orange as you descend the bluff toward dunes crowned with casuarina pines. The air cools, and the scent of roasted coconut drifts from roadside vendors selling evening snacks. A simple dish, banana slices topped with jaggery, and a sprinkle of cardamom. Tastes of centuries of adaptation, where imported spices meld with local produce to form enduring culinary traditions. The dish's lineage traces back to meals served on merchant vessels, but pinpointing its exact origin remains elusive. At the shoreline, a line of lanterns bob along a remnant jetty, erected by villagers to light nocturnal crab traps. They illuminate weathered coral platforms, each slab a fragment of dock or temple floor. Marine biologists note that these platforms serve as artificial reefs, teeming with fish, a reminder that Muziris's built remnants continue to shape ecological patterns. Few ecological studies draw direct lines between ancient architecture and modern biodiversity, yet here the connection is vivid. Under a star-pricked sky, the dunes exhale dunes of sand back into the lagoon with each gust of wind. A few scattered footprints, yours and those